Welcome back, members. Sorry about it being slightly longer than originally planned, but I took a straw poll against people who were trying to resolve stuff outside and getting fresh air, and also we had a slight delay in actually opening up the public galleries so the public to return, so it was only fair to make sure the public had opportunity to come back in. So if you please be seated. I now invite the City Lawyer to explain the end result of the previous item. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. With regard to agenda item 11, waiver of 6-month councillor attendance rule. The council agreed to extend Councillor Fleming's period of office beyond the 6-month period for non-attendance provided for within Section 85(1) of the Local Government Act 1972 on the grounds of ill health, and the extension of time for a period which will expire at midnight on the 20th of March 2019.
Thank you very much. We now have notice of the motion under Standing Order 32, and starting at number E, which I'm moving forward through my papers to. If I can invite Councillor Willington to introduce it.
Just to be helpful, I've done email around everybody to save people explaining why they should be debated now. As I emailed everybody, I think we should debate them all now and save those 5 times 3 minutes, as we just had a much longer break than we were expecting.
I think it is up to the person if they wish to take their extra 3 minutes, but hopefully some of them will decide not to. Councillor Willington.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I think the motion speaks for itself, and I hope we can debate it now.
And don't we have to vote? I can do it. Is that seconded, please? Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Udy. And all those in favour of debating it now, please show. Okay, that is carried. Councillor Willington, you now have your time allowed to introduce it. Thank you.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor, and thank you everyone for moving this forward so this can be debated today. Obviously, employment support allowance and personal independence payment are claimed by many people in our city, and I would imagine every single member of this chamber has had some involvement, possibly even personally, but certainly with all constituents and friends and family with claiming these benefits. Employment support allowance is a benefit which is payable to people who can't work, who are not fit enough to work and therefore wouldn't be on job seekers allowance or otherwise working, and it really is an essential part of people's lives to be able to claim their benefit and live their lives. And PIP, of course, is for people which is an additional benefit to help people with disabilities, and whether they be physical or mental or indeed learning. And thank you very much for John for his deputation earlier, Honorary Alderman John Attrell. And that helps with their day-to-day lives, whether in their daily living or whether in their mobility. So it is with not great shock, but ongoing sadness that we see the amount of people who go through their medical assessments for both these benefits and are turned down for the benefits. And this happens time and time and time again. And then it happens again and again and again. And it can happen to some people over and over again within their claiming lives. We've also heard from Honorary Alderman John Attrell about people moving from disability living allowance onto personal independence payment. So this is not a choice, this is what they are moved to do, and they have to be reassessed again. And again, people are being turned down. Now, it wouldn't be so bad, you would think, if these decisions were reliable. But of course, as you can see from the motion, 53%, so this is since the 1st of April 2017, 53% of all employment and sports allowance claimants who are turned down for the benefits and then go through the appeal process, they're successful. So that's 53%, more than half of those decisions are wrong. And that isn't including all those people, as Honourable Alderman Attrell mentioned earlier, who give up because the whole process is too upsetting, too difficult, or just too opaque. And then we have the even worse outcome of 75% of all personal independence payment appeals are successful. 75%. I cannot think of any other part of daily life, of life that we live, where things are so wrong that 75% of appeals against them are successful. I don't see that in the criminal justice system, for example. I don't see that when you've got an issue with something in the business world, but this happens time and time again. And having had the experience of working for the Department for Work and Pensions, and I actually used to do mandatory reconsiderations as my last job for the department, I am staggered by the quality of the decisions. And I'm not surprised at all when they get to an independent benefit tribunal, which takes place these days for people in the city at the Magistrates' Court just around the corner from here, that the independent tribunal, which is chaired by a judge and has at least a doctor, and if it's personal independence payment, has a disability specialist as well, they turn them down because they look at everything fresh. It really is unbelievable. And then, of course, you have the human cost, the upset that this caused, the absolute despair that people are in while they're waiting and waiting and waiting for their appeals to be heard. And they keep waiting, and it can take months and months and months. I had a friend recently I supported, it was over 7 months since they were turned down for their personal dependence payments until they had their appeal, and they weren't just awarded personal dependence payment, they were awarded at a higher rate than they had previously. And for those of you who are interested in cost, as you can see in the motion, £249,100 for employment and support allowance appeals is the cost to the taxpayer, and £274,750 is the cost to the taxpayer of PIP appeals. And that's just in Portsmouth and just since the 1st of April last year. It is a staggering waste of money. It is staggering in the cost. So I really hope members in this chamber can support this motion, can support the lobbying efforts to get the government to look again at their process, to actually get decent decisions in the first place, and to stop the misery and the waste of money that this dreadful situation that we have currently in our benefit system is ended, overturned, and we have a fit-for-purpose medical assessment process which actually gives people who need these benefits and are entitled to these benefits them in the first place, rather than having to go through appeal to get them. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much. Are there any amendments? No. In which case we are moving on to the debate. Anyone wish to? No. In which case, if we move straight to the vote then. Well, actually, you get to sum up. She did second it before, but okay, I hadn't seen your thing, but do you wish to speak? Yeah. Councillor Pitt.
Out of courtesy, Councillor Eady, did you want to go before me because you're seconding? Okay, that's fine. Lord Mayor, I think this is getting increasing attention as we move towards universal credit rollout. But this is not a new thing around these two benefits. Personal experience, having advocated for a personal friend for nearly 10 years to get final resolution to their quite right and justified benefit claim that they had, which resulted in the end of a bundle of papers that was over 8 inches thick and had to be bundled in volumes. And on the final day, when we were going in front of a judge to try and get a resolution to this situation, the DWP were asked, have you added anything to the bundle? And they said no. We sat there, my friend and I, flicking through the bundle to double check that was true, and it wasn't true. There were 2 extra pages added by the DWP. And what those 2 pages were about was the fact that all through the process, different government departments were refusing point blank to communicate with each other with effective information. That's what we're seeing here as well. In that particular instance, the person I was representing was being asked to prove that they had been in receipt of a certain level of benefit at a certain point. The government had that information, it must have had that information, they know who they've paid what to, and they refused to divulge it until we discovered in the bundle, going through it, that the document verifying my friend's statement was true and was in there. Since becoming a councillor, I've encountered a number of these situations. One came to me quite recently where somebody was medically assessed with a degenerative spinal condition to have improved. That is medically not possible. Their doctor had said it wasn't possible, yet the person doing the assessment said they had. It's not just around these 2 benefits. This is endemic in our benefit system. The amount of mental anguish that it produces in people is unforgivable. The friend that I worked with for over such a long period of time on this ended up on antidepressants and had to deal with an awful lot of mental anguish over it, and fortunately is a very strong character and well supported. But some people are not in that position, and they end up not just with physical disabilities, but with mental disabilities as well, as a result of poor practice, bad treatment and rubbish decisions made by the people who are entrusted by this country to look after those who need support the most. It's a disgraceful and indefensible position, and it must be addressed properly. This is not a party political issue. The case that I dealt with was taking place largely under the Labour government. The same sort of thing was going on under the coalition, the same thing's happening now. We are collectively responsible for this mess, and I hope the whole council is going to support this motion so that we can collectively send a voice to government to say that enough's enough.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. I now call Councillor Chowdhury.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It is clear this motion wants cross-party support from us all. The worry is that this benefit and its approach to plunging vulnerable, needy people into debt, whilst having a direct knock on cost of local qualities, because claims are not being validated in the first place and are then being cleared through an appeal process. The Labour has clear method to deal with this issue. First, a Labour government would order 3 months pause to Trouble's program. This brief break would enable a thorough review to take place so we could examine value for money, the management and deliver for the policy. Second, we will call the Independent National Audit Office to scrutinize universal credit and make sure the review conclusions are robust. We will ask the National Audit Office to produce quarterly report for Parliament on the progress of this major government scheme, aiming to increase transparency and openness on the policy that has been shrouded in secrecy. Third, the Labour Party will reverse the government decision not give the payment to the main carrier of children in a household. This has disproportionately affected a woman. Labour government will ensure payment of benefit for children and made to the person who is caring for them, not just for the main earner. Finally, Labour will make change to universal credit to cut red tape for the self-employed under the current regime, and the growing number of people who are self-employed are at risk, and increase the bureaucracy because they will have to understand and complete 3 separate set of accounting rules in order to comply with government's regulation. However, we live in reality where we cannot make this direct change right now, since we don't have the power to do so. Therefore, in the interim, we support the calls on the Department of Work and Pension to take appropriate action as requested by this mission to mitigate that damage being caused to the people here in our city in Portsmouth. We request all councillors to support this mission and add their signature to letter to the Secretary of State. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chowdhury. I have no one else have signals to speak, so therefore I call again Councillor Winnington, if you'd like to sum up, please.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor, and thank you for all the support those who have spoken have given to this, and I hope the rest of the council will as well. One of the most disgraceful parts of these statistics and the money that is wasted and the harm is caused is that in the over 10 years now that employment and support allowance has been introduced, an implementation that was made the universal credit implementation look like a piece of cake. The amount of appeals that have been successful is about the same. So in all that time, very little has been learnt by central governments, and yet again, as we've discussed before in this chamber, it is local governments, it's local representatives, local councillors, and it's local people, local communities that have to pick up the pieces from central government's mismanagement of their processes. Councillor Pitt, I thank him for his comments, and he's indeed right to raise about universal credit, as also Councillor Chowdhury did as well, because though the benefit will change, effectively the assessment will be the same, and again, no lessons have been learnt. And of course, the issue with universal credit is some of the people, about 75% of the people will be slightly worse, at least slightly worse off under universal credit compared to on employment support allowance, which in itself is a real concern. It really isn't good enough. And there was a comment earlier, I think, about equality impact assessments, I think from a councillor earlier on in the meeting. I do wonder if this would ever pass an equalities impact assessment, either of these, because the amount of absolute mental anguish and discrimination it shows towards those who really do need the help from governments to live their daily lives is absolutely extraordinary. So I hope everyone can support the motion. I hope we can really lobby, certainly as a cabinet, as a council, and as individuals, to try and change this system, because it is failing on every single level, both employment support allowance and PIP, and it isn't good enough, and we owe it to every single one of our residents who have gone through this and might go through this in the future to try and get this changed. And also, we should be shouting from the rooftops and getting other local authorities to support us as well and make a difference, and also our MPs in Parliament. Thank you very much, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Winnington. Moving straight to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Anyone against? Abstentions? That's carried with one abstention. Thank you very much. Moving on to notice of motion A, Office Inspection, Children and Families Directorate. Is this proposed by yourself, Councillor Ryan Brent? I think you have the opportunity for 3 minutes if you wish, but you're pushing an open door, so you might want to let that go.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think the motion, as it's written, gives the rationale as to why it should be debated today. I put it to members to debate it today.
Thank you very much. Ryan Brent and Councillor Pater-Harris, do you formally second it?
Seconded, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much. All those in favour of debating today? Carried, in which case you now have your 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Councillor Brent.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think this is an important notice of motion to bring to full council. It's a very factual notice of motion that shows the progression of children's services over time. I think as the previous lead member and cabinet member under the Conservative administration, I was perversely looking forward to the ILAC inspection from Ofsted because I knew of all of the good work that was going on within the directorate. There was the rhetoric that we used between all of us that it was the journey to outstanding, and this motion just sets out, it's with great pride that after the publication of the report, the Portsmouth City Council can say that the service that children and families receive is now overall good. I'm not going to read lots about the notice of motion, but I think there's a couple of things which are worth saying for the record, that this council therefore will hopefully place on record its sincerest congratulations and appreciation to all of the hard-working officers involved with the Children and Families Directorate who achieved an overall good inspection outcome for the city. I really do think this is something to be proud of. This isn't grounds for any political debate in my view, and I hope that this won't see that. I was just looking earlier, and obviously we get the corporate parenting monthly, which comes out from the Cabinet Member of Children and Families, and I'm proud to say that's something that I started, but I'm really pleased that Councillor Robert, who can't be here today unfortunately, is continuing. It's now on its 17th issue. This is a really, really good way to make sure that Portsmouth City Council and their elected members are fulfilling our corporate parenting responsibilities. Also in the news today, I don't know if anyone's read, but the council leader has looked at, it's good to hear that he's actually continuing on from what I had already brought up and worked on about the national transfer scheme and the increase in unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. I think it's good to see the hard work of the previous administration continue. There are a couple of things that I wanted to say, but I think less is more with this. I'd just like every member's support, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brent. I have Councillor Horton has signalled. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Sorry, I will just clarify, I haven't had any amendments. I'm assuming there's no amendments come forward. No, sorry about that, Councillor Horton, if you'd like to start again.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is going to be brief. I too would like to place on record my congratulations and thanks to everyone who has contributed to this good category in the Ofsted inspection. To direct my comments to the points that were made here, of course, the biggest and first thanks go to the hard-working officers who work in increasingly challenging times with funding pressures and new and complex issues. Their dedication and willingness to go that extra mile is abundantly clear, as is so often the case when people work with children. My thanks obviously extend to the previous administration and in particular the Cabinet portfolio holder. I, for one, found the introduction of the Corporate Parenting Monthly really informative and serves as also a regular reminder of our collective responsibilities as corporate parents. And I agree that we need to continue to embrace that with all the attention and seriousness that it warrants. And I know it has been a priority for Councillor Rob Wood. Lastly, of course, we will continue to support and prioritise this work, and for me as lead member of education, I will continue to look for opportunities where those two portfolios overlap. I think it's really reassuring that we can celebrate that important services can flourish between administrations and that collectively we have a commitment for the futures of children and young people in this city, whatever our political futures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Horton. I'll call Councillor Vernon Jackson, please.
Madam Mayor, last council meeting, I hope I spoke for us all that to thank everybody involved in trying to make sure that we recognise the hard work everybody had put in. We could try to put in an amendment to change things, but I really can't. It just seems to me it's not a game I want to play. I'm slightly disappointed we had something saying how wonderful one group of people were, because actually the record is people over the last 20 years since we've run children's social services, more than 20 years, but 30 years, here in 20-odd years here in the city, have all worked hard, and I think we need to thank everybody, irrespective of which political group they might have been part of.
Thank you very much, Councillor Vernon Jackson. I've had no one else signal to speak, therefore I move to Councillor Brent to sum up, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just appreciate the comments that were made, but just remember that this is a factual notice of motion in the sense that this is the first time that the children's service has been rated as good overall, as it does say in the word and in paragraph 3, since 2010's Children's Services Annual Assessment. So, sorry to correct you, but it is in the writing there. All I can do is hopefully people vote for this, and we'll just encourage everyone that we are corporate parents, we have to take the responsibility seriously, embrace every opportunity that you can to make your face known and to really appreciate the hard work that does go on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, in which case we move to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. I now move on to next motion B, school cuts proposed by Councillor Horton and seconded by Councillor Madden. Councillor Horton, do you wish to take your 3 minutes to...
Okay, I'm not going to take 3 minutes, but I just want to say the reason I brought this to full council was you'd have to be asleep to not know that there's issues around school funding. And I just think it's important that we send out a message to our local teachers and schools that we're on their side, supporting and listening them. So that's why I brought this to full council.
Thank you very much. And can I confirm, Councillor Madden, that's seconded, please?
Yes, Lord.
Thank you very much. In which case, all those in favour of debating that tonight? And that's carried. So therefore, Councillor Horton, you now get to do your full speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just want to focus on 3 things, really. A little bit of outline about funding, but I won't go into it in too much detail because it's very complex, but why this is a council issue. A little bit about Portsmouth schools, and then finally about what I hope we can do. School funding, interestingly, has been a key part of my life from the first day of my career. I started teaching, given my age away, just after the 1988 Education Reform Act, which, amongst other delights such as league tables and statutory testing, introduced LMS, which was Local Management of Schools. And this basically was the start of a transition to schools becoming semi-autonomous businesses from a situation, if I remember correctly, where the annual budget in my first year of teaching was less than £800, which was essentially around buying paint and glue sticks, to when I left, some 15 years later, where we were managing a budget of 1.5 million in a primary school. But schools are not for-profit making businesses. They merely want the right amount of money to offer young people the education that they deserve. So it's crucial that funding from central government is sufficient to do the job and is always maintained. So like any debate about funding, different statistics, phrases, measurements abound. In the case of school funding, it's stuff around designated schools grant, national funding formula, all these things that we hear about, high needs funding, and a number such as £39 billion, which sounds a lot of money being spent on schools. But all of these are interrelated in quite a complex picture, and sometimes this is used to portray a situation that doesn't actually square with the day-to-day lives of teachers. The reality is that in real terms, schools and colleges are getting less money. Since 2015, the average primary school's lost over £55,000 in per pupil funding, and the average secondary school lost £218,000. And in Portsmouth, this totals over £3.7 million. This is not a shortfall for little extras, but this is the potential loss of teaching staff, support staff, and other key resources to offer children and young people the education that they deserve. Now, at the same time, the number of children with special educational needs is rising, and this is a significant factor when it comes to school funding, as for many children with SEN, the costs for additional support are first taken from the general school's budget. This leads to an invidious situation where there's less money in the envelope to start with, but schools have to do more with it. So when people hear schools, teachers and the unions talking about school cuts and SEN cuts in the same breath, it's because they're inextricably linked. When it comes to additional SEN funding, it's also possible to have the same nominal amount of money, but be dealing with a cut per pupil as numbers rise and needs become more complex. So, as I said, 3.7 million reduction in Portsmouth schools, but credit must go to the finance and education officers as well as other representatives for creating the fairest system that we possibly can have in Portsmouth schools via Schools Forum, where the money is, there's an attempt to distribute the money equitably. When I go into schools, I'm still in awe of how teachers and leaders mitigate against these cuts and prioritise good teaching and learning and a broad curriculum to meet the needs of every child in the most resourceful ways. Teachers are inherently resilient, but over the last few years, they've seen their budgets cut to the bone, and I believe that the cuts campaigns, the hashtag school fly on the wall documentary on BBC, and the recent talk of a strike ballot even, are a sign of the serious panic that the profession is facing, nearing a tipping point into a crisis situation. So why bring this to full council and what next? As the Cabinet Member for Education, I'd like us to join a growing number of local authorities in writing to the Secretary of State for Education, in registering our concerns and calling for sufficient funding for schools, both for the recent Teacher Pay Award, which incidentally a large chunk of which also has to come out of the same budget envelope, and especially for SEN provision. Whilst Portsmouth actually fares quite well compared with many other local education authorities, when it comes to the high needs block, for example, 98% of education, health and care plans are completed within statutory frameworks, compared with a national average of about 54%. But this has been achieved with no increase in funding in the context of rising numbers. In other words, despite faring well, it logically cannot continue unless there is suddenly a decline in SEND numbers, which it's not going to happen. So what I want us to do is collectively ask our two MPs. I know Stephen Morgan isn't here today, but I have noticed that he is running a campaign himself as our MP for Portsmouth South, which is good. So to have MPs and the Council both wanting the same thing is a much louder and stronger and effective voice for Portsmouth schools, and I hope that we can all continue to support all teachers and heads. At a time when we need to recruit and keep teachers in what is frequently described as one of the most rewarding, albeit demanding jobs, we need to be demanding better for Portsmouth schools and sending that message loud and clear to the government. Please support the motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Horton. I have so far received 3 amendments. Are there any other amendments to be tabled? In which case, I plan to take them through to be proposed in the order that they've been submitted. So, actually, are we happy to have them all distributed? Councillor Smythe? Councillor Jones, you happy for? And Councillor Stubbs, you happy to be? If we have them all distributed at the start, it will save time later. Thank you.
probably get...
Can I just confirm, does everyone have 3 different bits of paper in front of them? Consider yourself exceptionally special. Okay, you don't have the... You don't have... Okay. Surely you know what it is, though.
Peter, Peter, have you got a copy for...
Has anyone got a surplus Labour one so the Labour members can see what it is, please? Okay, hopefully, unless anyone's going to frantically wave at me, I now invite Councillor Smythe to introduce her amendment, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I hope you'll be able to hear me all right. I've uncharacteristically lost my voice, but I won't be the first female politician to be interrupted by a coughing fit, so I'm just hoping it doesn't happen. So, as a second point, these are amendments to the first half of the motion, and we would like to add a second point that the City Council notes the disproportionate effect on children with SEN. And I think Councillor Horton navigated her way through the difficulties of describing that to people extremely well. She's absolutely right about that. But the fact is that funding for children with SEN is inadequate because there are more children and young people with SEN and rising numbers presenting with higher needs than in the past. And frankly, failing to support these children will result in family problems and fewer people being able to cope without enormous support for the rest of their lives. The great work of Mary Rose School, Cliffdale School, Redwood, and teachers of SEN up and down the city not only focuses on education but on life skills. Children with EBD, educational and behavioural difficulties, need lots of emotional and behavioural difficulties, need lots of support at school. National statistics are alarming. For example, 40% of children and young people who have experienced violence at home or have a parent who has been in prison go on to develop similar problems as adults, with dreadful consequences for their families, their own children, and for the public purse. We need to reverse that trend here in Portsmouth. So, point 2 amendment, we do owe it to our children and young people not to stand back and let these cuts happen. Young people only get one chance at school and college, and we know that school and college cuts never heal. The next generation of our city deserves better. I wanted to strengthen that so that it could inform our communications on and up that are referred to in the amendments to the resolution. Moving to the second bit of our amendment, I wanted to add as a fourth resolution to welcome the Member of Parliament for Portsmouth South's ongoing campaign against school and college cuts and fully supporting his long-standing campaign to resist the government's ongoing cuts to education budgets in the city. In fact, having got a permission to come and be here today despite a three-line whip, that was reversed only this morning, and Councillor Stephen Morgan is in fact missing this meeting because of a 3-line whip on school cuts and on mental health, and as I speak he's in Parliament fighting for funding for Portsmouth children and young people. The motion that Stephen will be backing, Councillor Morgan will be backing in Parliament, draws attention to the figures from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which finds that education spending as a share of national income has fallen from 5.8% to only 4.3% of national income. Since 2010. This is a disgrace. Cuts of this order are damaging our economy and will affect the lives of a whole generation. As far as education is concerned, we contend there is no end to austerity. The fourth point that we make is just sort of tidying it up. Because as a fifth resolution to support the NEU and coalition of other trades unions, parents, school governors and residents against school cuts, because there are a lot of people out there who are equally concerned, as we all are here, about that. And the last resolution, which would now become the sixth resolution, is to amend the final resolution by deleting City's 2 MPs, because we know Stephen Morgan is doing his job now as we speak, and substituting MP for North Portsmouth. Thank you.
Just before we go to second, I think Councillor Young needs to just say something.
Yes, sorry, Lord Mayor, I should have declared this earlier, and I've just taken advice from the City Solicitor. As the charity that I work for it does run 2 schools, I'm going to leave the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Young. And can I ask, is this seconded, please?
Formally seconded, my Lord Mayor.
And you're reserving your right to speak?
Reserving my right.
Thank you very much. And moving on to the next amendment, Councillor Jones, if you'd like to present your amendment, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. So I'm happy to propose the amendment in my name. It's really just recognising, obviously, that there is a legacy here of the policy having started in the previous coalition government. Actually, there are a number of really important points raised in this notice of motion from Councillor Horton, which I welcome. Sorry, Councillor Bosher. And, you know, one of the things I do want to make a point of is that actually, whilst we would all love more funding for schools, and I'm happy to support and campaign for that, particularly for funding in special educational needs, which we've just heard from Councillor Smythe, which is, I do think, actually underfunded, and I do think that the outcomes for children with special educational needs still fall far behind those of, I hate the word, normal, able-bodied children, and so actually we should be doing more to help them, because I think there is far more that they could be doing in society once they leave education, if they're given the right training and preparation for adult life. In terms of funding for schools, actually funding for schools has gone up every single year. And as you'll see in the amendment coming forward from Councillor Luke Stubbs, you know, next year's budget that will start on the 1st of April actually has the highest amount of money ever spent on education in this country's history. Now, it may not be as much as we'd like it to, but when we talk about cuts to school funding, they haven't seen a dramatic decrease in their funding as we have in local government or the police, for example. Actually, education has been one of the parts of national spending that has had a relative amount of protection, and I do acknowledge it's not enough. I appreciate we want to spend more on education, just like we'd all like to spend more on everything in the public service, from the NHS to policing to prisons and obviously local government. I appreciate that the conflict here will arise from inflation levels and from the amount of funding schools have received each year in terms of their increase, albeit relatively small, in relation to inflation. And actually, when you look at the inflation levels over the last 4 or 5 years, and you look at the prediction of inflation over the next 3 or 4 years, the inflation levels are due to level out at around the 2% mark or just below. I'm also pleased that in the budget last month, the Chancellor did confirm an additional £400 million over the next 12 months for schools. Again, that's mentioned in Councillor Stubbs' amendment. I do think as well that it's worth just focusing on Portsmouth, on our own situation here for a moment, because over the last 4 years, whilst there hasn't been as much cash in the pot as we would have liked it to, and in particular for special educational needs, standards have still improved. Because under both Councillor Brent and Councillor Neil Young, as our 2 Cabinet members and Councillor Hockaday, specialising in improving standards for children in social care, children's health and also education, we inherited in 2014, when we formed a new administration, 58% of schools in Portsmouth were good or outstanding, and actually in May this year they were around 83% good or outstanding. And whilst the government's compulsory academies programme was dropped because it was particularly unpopular, actually in Portsmouth that model did fit quite well for us, and that did unequivocally have an impact on us helping to improve the standards of teaching and school output dramatically. And I'm very grateful to the amazing teachers that we've got in Portsmouth, the dedicated staff, people that really do see it as a calling to go into teaching, to teach young people or adults or people with learning disabilities. And I also want to finish by talking about the special educational needs educational establishments we've got in Portsmouth, because we do have some of the best, not just in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, but actually I think in the sub-region. And we know that because children do actually attend our schools from Hampshire. They are attending the special schools in Portsmouth, and we have got some fantastic outcomes coming there. And I mean, Mary Rose particularly is award-winning, nationally recognised, and actually the Department for Education themselves have had studies and run projects with us in conjunction with that school because of the recognition of Alison and the team there having done such a great job and being able to sustain it as well. So yes, we want more money for schools. I think particularly special educational needs, I very much support that. And I'm happy to do anything I can to help promote this cause going forward long term, and I would urge colleagues to support my amendment today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. Is that seconded by yourself, Councillor New?
Yes, formally seconded.
And reserve your right to speak?
Yeah.
Thank you much. Is yours for the vote or a question at this point? Okay, cool. And in which case we move on to the third amendment. So, Councillor Stubbs, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. A month or so ago, when I was doing a bit of tidying up in my flat, I found council budget papers. Again, yes. I found council budget papers from 2008. And the numbers in those was quite interesting reading, because this council actually spent more in cash terms then than it spends now. Now, it's obviously making direct comparisons over that length of time is tricky, but I think that however you look at it, this local authority has had a radical reduction in budget, and that is a cut, and that is true austerity. But the school system is very different. The schools have had quite substantial protection throughout the savings programme. Spending has risen year on year. The total spend on schools is higher now than at any time in history, and it has kept track with inflation. It's not the natural order of things that the government spends more on everything every year. It is not the natural order of things that people, have a bigger budget and more in real terms every year, because that fails to take account of the reality that all of this, so much of the previous Labour government spending was based upon printing money, and we ended up with a spectacular deficit. We ended up with a government that we cannot afford, and which, had we tried to continue printing money in that way, what would have happened is we'd have triggered quite high inflation, and everyone would have been poorer for it. So the government had to do something, and it's been absolutely right to do something about trying to close the deficit. Now, I know it doesn't matter to everyone. I know Corbyn doesn't care about the deficit and thinks you can print as much money as you like, and sometimes I wonder whether the Liberal Democrats agree with that. I didn't used to think they did, now I'm not quite so sure, but you can't actually do that. Now, Councillor Horton was right about there being various bases of statistics, various ways you can do comparison, and that's certainly true. But on all the ones I've seen, there isn't one which makes any case that we are spending less per pupil in real terms than we were in 2008. And I don't remember hearing in 2008 about how schools were in, how kids were going hungry and the schools were falling to pieces and it was Dickensian conditions in the schools. In 2008, the schools were absolutely fine, at least in terms of how they were funded. Obviously educational standards could always be better, but in terms of how staff were paid and how schools were funded, it was not a problem. And all we're doing, the most that has actually happened on the budgets is to take us back to those days. If indeed it's that, because I can find other statistics which say that there's no reduction at all. But it's certainly 2008. Bear that in mind. I would have had more sympathy for this motion, actually, had it talked about the national funding formula and made representations on that, because that is going to have major effects and we don't know what they are. And it will necessarily, if you have a single formula for the country, be redistributive in some way or another. And we don't know whether Portsmouth is going to be amongst the winners or amongst the losers. And so I think a motion along those lines, lobbying the government just for the best deal for urban authorities like this one, is something I would have had more sympathy with. But to say that everything's going to hell in a handbasket, I'm afraid I don't accept that.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Stubbs. I've got Councillor Benson. Do you formally second that?
Formally seconded, Lord Mayor, and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor Horton, you were going to make an announcement.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm happy to accept, but without going to debate, Councillor Jones's amendment, so we don't have to debate it. In fact, I'll have a word with you afterwards, Councillor Jones, but I have some views on Mr Laws that you and I probably can agree on. Okay.
Thank you very much. That's the second amendment is assumed into the substantive already. We now open to debate. You unpressed yourself. Are you still in the list? Or? Yeah, okay. Councillor Lyon, please.
Thank you. This is unusual to speak 3 times in the meeting. I do apologise. And then I feel like my surname should be changed to Winnington, but I'm not sure. I just wanted to talk about the Labour amendments. First of all, to say as well, I was sorry that there was a politicisation of this issue. I understand perfectly that people have strong views, but actually to make it as unpolitical as possible is a good idea. The IFS talked about a 5.8% spending in 2008. That's absolutely true, but of that 2% was the capital funding of school buildings. And what you will know, Lord Mayor, is that the Labour Party built lots of new buildings and put old schools back into them, which was a bit of a shame. But I can certainly support the SEN element of the amendment because I remember around about that time, and certainly for a number of years, it became a shameful policy, not of the politicians, but often of executives, to allocate places as far away as possible from the home of those who had special educational needs, which parents understandably turned down. And from the moment that the new school term began, because the SEN children stayed at home, they were treated as being homeschooled, which is absolutely shameful. And I'm very glad that over the last few years we've managed, I think collectively, and we've tried right across the country, to recognise and reverse that policy. I could have made another point in any of the last 2 and this motion, about ambitions of head teachers. I know of one in Portsmouth, I'm sorry to say, he or she, I'll try to anonymise the person concerned, who has been heard to say on a number of occasions that they didn't want an outstanding Ofsted report because it would be too difficult to maintain. To me, that is a terrible indictment of the way people should be running schools. They should aim for the highest, and that should happen at all times. It's what we are paying them for, and the idea that they can just coast is to me totally wrong. Which leads really on to the politicising of schools. I'm glad that Councillor Horton has decided to subsume the Conservative amendment, really because I don't think it sets a good example to have kind of industrial action of either inertia or actually acting for a particular cause in front of school children. I'm not saying it's a bad thing that children should learn to express themselves, but it does mean that we're in danger of allowing whole cohorts of schools to see politicisation of complex issues of funding and whether or not, for example, academy is the right thing. I mean, there are lots of issues involved, and I don't think that they are necessarily communicated in an apolitical fashion. And we should, at all times, try to keep politics out of education where we can. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lyon. I now call upon Councillor Ferret, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yeah, I find myself in the unusual position of, I think, agreeing with the motion and all the amendments in some part, and also agreeing with Councillor Lyons there as well. And I think if the motion had been written in a slightly different way, we certainly would have avoided a couple of the amendments. And I think Councillor Lyons is right. We should be trying to take forward issues, certainly around education, forward on a non-partisan basis. Having said that, I feel obliged to talk about a motion which, a Liberal Democrat motion which alludes to political history starting in 2015, because, as we know, they were in government from 2010 to 2015, and indeed in this chamber we had the 22nd most important Liberal Democrat in the country. I'm constantly recalibrating that. I don't know where he's going to be, because I know Liberal Democrats in severe financial troubles at the moment, and they're going to get rid of half their staff apparently, so that might move him back up the league table. But nevertheless, 22nd most important Liberal Democrat, who had the opportunity then in government to really influence this, and this was a time, as Councillor Stubbs has said, when cuts were being implemented, but clearly part of the government felt, and I can understand that as someone himself who was part of a political party at the time, felt obliged to defend his party, but you can't just gloss over that and write motions as if 2010 to 2015 and the trajectory for the cuts that were set by a Liberal Democrat in the Treasury, Danny Alexander, played a big role in setting those cuts and the trajectory. You can't just ignore that. Clearly, in terms of the amendments themselves, clearly the Councillor Jones amendments alludes to what I just said in terms of the Liberal Democrat role in government and the fact these cuts have been coming in since 2010. In terms of Councillor Stubbs' amendment, and I think, all three political parties between 2010 and 2015 essentially accepted that there had to be quite a rigorous programme of deficit reduction. That was clearly Labour Party policy as well. The Labour Party policy was about reducing the deficit by half, which, lo and behold, in 2015 the deficit had been reduced by half. The coalition government said they were going to completely get rid of the deficit by 2015. As we know, that didn't happen, and is unlikely to happen in our lifetimes if we look at what's happening with public finances in the light of Brexit. And in terms of asking RMP for Portsmouth North, clearly the best thing that she can do, if we want money for our public finances and money for education, is A, get behind the Prime Minister and make sure that we get some sort of deal, because the line that she's pursuing with the ERG and possible no deal could leave us in a position where all public services are going to be suffering massive cuts, or she comes and joins us and supports the people's vote, and we can just walk away from the whole madness of Brexit and what it's going to do to our country financially. In terms of the Labour amendment, clearly I can support this amendment. I supported the Labour government that did put record numbers of, or record financing into education before 2010. Unlike, and I seem to be saying this every meeting, unlike many in today's Labour Party, I'm proud of the record of the last Labour government, and I think anyone who's connected to the Labour Party should be proud of it. What I can't understand is why it's saying delete the city's 2 MPs, not quite sure in terms of deleting them, and substituting MP for Portsmouth North. I would have thought this was right up the street of the MP for Portsmouth South. The bloke is a walking campaign. I would have thought he'd absolutely relish this opportunity, from here for my career, today from here but not here. And I don't know whether to call him part-time MP or part-time councillor or a no-time councillor. It's quite bizarre that we have a leader of a political grouping who is not here at full council meetings, and the Labour Party effectively have no leadership. Next month's meeting is a budget. At that time, I understand the Commons are going to be talking about Brexit, possibly discussing the withdrawal agreement, and I would expect my MP, and I would expect there is a three-line whip on that occasion, to be in Westminster talking about the withdrawal agreement. But where does that leave the Labour Party in Portsmouth on this council in terms of the budget? They've really got to sort it out, because it's a terrible, terrible look when they have no leader here, and clearly he's in another place. Talking about very important issues, but clearly issues are important here. The one thing I will say about the Labour amendment that tends to undermine it is their policy towards education spending, which is to effectively £11 billion of tuition fees, to say that they're going to scrap tuition fees. That's going to cost £11 billion. That's absolutely crazy. The benefit of that cut in tuition fees is largely going to go to higher earners and the more well-off. Surely that £11 billion would be better for early years education. So again, I suppose all the time you're led by someone like Jeremy Corbyn, then you can propose anything, and you don't have to be honest with the electorate. But if you're ever in government, you're going to have to be honest.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fair. I now call upon Councillor Madden.
Well, thank you, Lord Mayor, and I'm happy today to be here to second the notice of motion on the order paper. I'd like to start, first of all, if I may, with the £400 million that the Chancellor of the Exchequer give as little extras for our schools. Of course, what it just means in reality is £10,000 for primary schools and £50,000 for secondary schools. Now, when he was doing his budget, he told us that the era, wherever you come from, of austerity was finally coming to an end. And whilst the government was investing millions in schools, he acknowledged that school budgets do not stretch to that little bit of extra kit that would make such a difference. Wow. Well, Mr. Hammond, I have to tell you, what makes a difference are teachers, classroom assistants and textbooks. That's what make a difference in our schools. The reaction to this announcement, of course, was immediate and was scathing. Now, I just saw in a paper I was reading the other week that a Labour MP called Lucy Powell, who sits in the Commons Education Select Committee, called Philip Hammond so patronising. She doesn't mince her words, does she? I have to say that the reaction from other people was more Anglo-Saxon than that was. But the little extras, you know, have to be set in context of the national and the local picture. Now, we're going to hear loads of statistics bandied about today, but nevertheless, I have to tell you the one respected institution that I come across is the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Now, they tell us since 2010, Councillor Ferret, 2010, when there was, of course, the coalition government started, education spending is down by 8% per pupil. And here's a slight comparison which people will find interesting, I hope. State schools receive between £4,500 and £4,800 per pupil per annum. Private schools charge an average of £18,000 a year for each day pupil. Locally, and I just have to go on what the NUT is saying, the NUT states that as a result of the budget, 50 out of our 56 schools will see cuts. And just to look at some of the schools in Nelson Ward, where I am one of the 3 councillors that represented, let me tell you the Stamshire Infant School is set to lose £80,934, representing a loss of £130 per pupil per year. Corpus Christi, and all my children went to Corpus Christi, and some of my grandchildren, so I declare a slight interest there, is set to lose £54,714, resulting in a loss of £170 per pupil per year. And just to look at some of the other schools in Portsmouth itself, the Ark Academy, Mayfield, St Edmunds are all set to lose hundreds of thousands of pounds, okay, with a loss per pupil per year of 176 in King Richard's to £608 per pupil per year at the Ark Academy. Now those are the statistics. They're there. A few more statistics if I may. The F40 group, which I just picked up when I was looking into this, and that's an education lobby, and it includes dozens of Conservative MPs as well as local councils, and they're asking for an immediate injection of £2 billion into the education system, and they're also looking for emergency funding as well of £1.5 billion for pupils with conditions like autism and dyslexia to remain in the mainstream schools. Well, we would not want the situation to develop here in Portsmouth, and I understand it hasn't yet, which is happening in other parts of the country, where some schools are closed on Fridays because of funding cuts, or where parents have been asked to pay for things like toilet paper and textbooks. There might be a small light for some school funding at the end of that tunnel that people were talking about today, because in the information I've been reading, it appears that some MPs lost their seats at the last general election because of school funding cuts. One of them being Edward Timpson, who was then the Children's Minister. So it may well be that when local MPs are looking to say they want to hold their seat, and which MP doesn't do that, they might think that education is more important than hitherto they thought it was. So what we're looking at, Lord Mayor, is for the future, for this generation and the next generation, and proper... Did you do that? And I can't get used to this yet, after all these years, and proper funding for our children. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Madden. I now call upon Councillor Vernon Jackson, please.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I think the thing that probably will unite us all is that this is an enormous problem. Schools are not lying when they say they don't have the money to be able to provide the education children need. To be able to use numbers that just say the cash is going up without actually reflecting on the demands in schools isn't real. So I hope we would all recognise that the increase in pension payments that's expected out of schools' budget mean that there's less money to be spent on education for pupils. So we've got to recognise the reality of where we are, and actually I think probably the figures provided by the NUT are probably more reliable than those provided by the government. So I think we need to recognise that there is a real problem in schools, and I think it is a thing that we all recognise. I had hoped, my Lord Mayor, with this motion that we could all be working together and making sure that we could campaign for schools. And I do say I have disappointments with people from all three sides in this debate. And I need to start, as is appropriate, to reflect John Ferrick's view with Susie Horton. And I have to say that I'm disappointed that this motion did not reflect on the great history of William Gladstone and the Education Act, Elementary Education Act of 1870. Now, if we're going to remember good liberal history, we need to remember that, and making sure that we remember that elementary education was brought in by good liberal government, exactly the same as the old age pension. So, my Lord Mayor, so I'm disappointed, Councillor Horton, that you have not trumpeted the great liberal history here. But, my Lord Mayor, I do recognise that Councillor Horton, Lord Mayor, are you concentrating? Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I know you're a bloke, and therefore you can't multitask. But I think Councillor Horton has tried to make sure that the motion she brought here was not party political in its tone, and I think that is good. So I am prepared to accept that Councillor Horton is right in this and that I am wrong. But then to go to the two other amendments, I think really we can't accept Luke's amendment, because the reality we all know, anybody who visits a school knows there is a problem with money in schools. Anybody who pretends there isn't is not living in a real world, and I don't know, Luke, when you last went to a state school and talked to them about their budgets, but that's good. But in which case, the message coming to me and everybody else, I think, in this chamber about problems in schools doesn't appear to be getting to you. I then turn to the Labour amendment, and I can agree with the first half of it. I think that's all really sensible bit. And I would plead with you, the bit at the end, the bit of party political flag waving, is really disappointing. One of the things the Labour group said to us is they want us to try to be more consensual, more working together. And having something that says, but we need to praise Stephen. Actually, I'm absolutely clear that Stephen is campaigning for this better than Penny. But actually, I want to make sure that all the MPs in this city are briefed about everything. And here you're saying, don't bother briefing Stephen. Now, I'm disappointing that. It does. It says only brief Penny. It says ignore Stephen. And I don't think we should ignore Stephen. because I think that's not right. And I would plead with you, if only you could lose the second half of your proposal, I think everybody would want to adopt it, because it keeps the idea of this being non-partisan. I wasn't happy with the previous suggestion from the Conservatives that they trumpet and said they were wonderful about children's social care, because I think everybody has worked across this council to improve children's social care. I wasn't prepared to have that fight. I just can't be bothered with it. And I think we should try to work together. And in exactly the same way, I'm sorry that the Labour amendment falls into the same trap of just saying, let's wave the flag for one lot, it's just us. So I'm disappointed in that, and I hope that we could try to get to a point where we could all agree that we all work together and that we brief all of the MPs, we work with everybody to try to make sure we get a better deal for school children, because my goodness me, do they need it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Vernon Jackson. You've certainly brought a smile to many people's faces. Can I now call on Councillor... Can I call Councillor Smith, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I wasn't going to get up, but I think what's really important today is that we're talking about children, and we're talking about funding and SEN. And if everybody wants to give a history lesson, and where it went wrong was when academies was brought in. Because I go around to many schools in my day job, and most academy schools, before they even start their financial year, have to take out quite a proportion of their funds for administration fees. That's where the money is going. It's not going to SEN, it's not going to children's education, it's not going to anywhere. It's to support the backroom staff. One school in Hampshire, a secondary school, has to spend £750,000 before they start. So let's get real about where this money is going, and let's get real about what we're arguing about today, and it should be a cross-party for the benefit of Portsmouth schools, not party politics. And the trouble is, when you do party politics, everything gets lost. So please, look at the motion and let's help our schools. And if our schools and our teachers and our support staff do go out on strike, I'll be one supporting them on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. I now call on Councillor Winnington, please.
Well, sorry, I was just finding the education bill in Gladstone's biography there by Roy Jenkins, which I've taken to read on my journey up to Manchester this evening. Could I just actually start? So there's just a bit of a personal thing, if the Lord Mayor will allow me to today. So I know Armistice Day 100th anniversary was 2 days ago. But for me, this has particular significance today because it's the 100th anniversary of the birth of my late grandma, who was born 2 days after the end of the First World War, and she was actually had the middle name my great-grandparents gave her, which was Olive, which was the name she was known by her entire life by everyone who knew her. So I'd just like to pay tribute to my grandma today, and actually there is a significance with this debate as well, because her last job was as a cleaner in a school just down the road from where she lived for 30 or 40 years. So to come to this particular thing about cuts and funding, I'm also my grandma's daughter. Eldest daughter is my mum, and my mum is a former teacher. And I think one of the things that's really significant in this, and has been discussed at length, and is in the motion, is the long-term underfunding of schools. And I think we see that from when my mum stopped teaching 19 years ago before becoming a full-time foster carer, that was an issue then as it is now. And that unfortunately funding and underfunding of schools can often be used for purposes that are less than noble as well. I have a personal issue with a particular case of underfunding at the moment, which is my old school back in Hastings, which should be, this time next year, celebrating its 400th anniversary. Unfortunately, and as Councillor Jeanette Smith has just mentioned about academies, it is run by an academy chain that also runs another school in Hastings, and they're looking to merge it and therefore end the school 2 months shy of its 400th birthday for financial reasons. I think that really shows us that if you're getting to the stage of not just about people's education, but also about schools with great history and great significance for the towns and cities they're in, then there really is a serious problem with how we're going with our schooling. I cannot stress enough the impact that, having been a governor, when I was a governor for 5 years of a school in the city, and from what I hear from teachers around the piece, the impact that the lack of funding has on schools, has on teachers and has on pupils, where you get such huge pressures and you have to make such huge decisions that make an impact on our children. After all, this is the children's one chance at education. They don't get another one. You can't start it all over again. This is the one chance. And then you get this patronising nonsense from a chancellor who says £400 million for the little things. I mean, what does that tell you? What does that tell you as schools, and what does that do for our children? It does very, very little. We need to acknowledge about the underfunding about education. We can't ignore it. We have to understand that education has to be paid for. It is the most important. For me, education is the most important thing. It permeates through so much of what we do, and it has so much impact. A well-educated populace tend to be healthier and wealthier. That's just something that anyone can sign up to. But if we get education wrong, if you use that as something that you don't fund properly, you are going to get more unhealthy, poorer people, because they're not going to be able to get their way through the world, and they're always going to need more assistance and more help. That isn't a way we need to be. And it's also education. We were talking earlier about things like mental health. If people are better educated and they better understand about mental health issues, they can both help themselves more, but they can help other people as well. So you have to get it right. You cannot go with these endless cuts. We've seen what they are, and Councillor Madden has brought out in stark relief about the cuts that have come in over the last few years. But you can't have those cuts ongoing and expect there to be no impact. There is forever a pressure on our children. We expect ever more of them. There are more pressures on teachers as well, and of course we see them, the cost of trying to keep them in the profession and actually get them into the profession in the first place is an ongoing struggle. So we have to fund our schools properly. So I thank Councillor Horton and Councillor Madden for the motion, and I do hope we can support it and really go forwards and say our children in this city deserve better. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wellington. I now call Councillor Dowling, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm about to say something that I never thought I would be the person to say in a full council meeting, and it's been 4.5 years since I was first elected, but I genuinely didn't intend to speak on this debate, because I thought this was one of those kind of no-brainer debates. Yes, everyone agrees that schools are important, and we'd have a bit of angry agreeing, and then we'd vote it through, and then we'd move on. I genuinely thought that's how this debate was going to go, so I'm going to address directly the amendment from Councillor Stubbs. I think, members, we have to consider the people that we have in the room, the people that we listen to, the people that write the reports that we read. Very interesting meeting last week for Scrutiny Management Panel. Lots of debate about where councillors get their information from and how they make their decisions. Well, I would put the same question to the people in the room today. Do we listen to Councillor Susie Horton, who's the current Cabinet Member for Education, who is constantly briefed by very highly qualified officers at the City Council, who regularly meets with our schools and regularly does that. She's also a former deputy head leader of a primary school, a current school governor, and a lecturer at the University of Portsmouth on the topic of education, including education funding over the past 100 years. Or do we listen to Councillor Luke Stubbs? That's the question. There's a significant question there. And I would put a real challenge to Councillor Stubbs and any other person in this room that seriously wants to suggest that schools have enough funding, because that simply is not the case. I work in schools, as most people in the room know, on a weekly basis. I see exactly what schools go through, both in Portsmouth and outside of the city. And I would encourage people in the room, if you don't already, to actively engage with the schools in your patch, actively engage in the schools elsewhere. If you're not already a school governor, something to consider. We have a deficit in the city at the moment. Something to think about.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dowling. I now call on Councillor Coles, please.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. As seconder for Councillor Smythe's amendment, I just wanted to clarify that we weren't suggesting taking Stephen off it. We were just acknowledging Stephen Morgan's work as MP for Portsmouth South on his work on the campaign for Portsmouth schools. On a personal note, I just want to say that as a parent of 3 young children, I'm worried sick about school funding. It's not in a good place. But yeah, I hope you can support our amendment.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Coles. And okay, moving on, I'd like to ask Councillor Horton to sum up, please.
Thank you for a bit more of a lively debate than I thought. I just want to make a couple of points. The first point I want to make is actually I tried to word the notice of motion to include all schools. Anything on education, and thank you very much, Councillor Dowling, for my big up on my knowledge on this, but one of the things is when you know a lot about something, as everyone knows, you see the interconnectivity of everything. And I actually had to really narrow my focus because I could have got started talking about academisation, curriculum, league tables, the historic political decisions, and gone off on quite a tangent. So actually, I don't want to distinguish even between academies and mainstream schools. I want to think about all schools. So first of all, I just want to make a comment about Councillor Stubbs' amendment, and in actual fact, in a weird way, I found myself nodding for some of it because you perfectly summed up what I was saying in my opening comments about how complex this is, and that you can claim that something has had actual amount of money increased, but when you actually look into the political the landscape and the backdrop to it, it actually equates with less bang for your buck in some ways. And I just cannot accept, with everything that I know, that there is no problem. I just don't see it as a truth. And the main reason is because of what's going out there locally and nationally. I mean, I can't believe that schools and teachers have used their spare time to plan and execute a countrywide campaign about school cuts. The fact is they're going out and they're crying out for help, and I think that we should do our bit to support them. When it comes to the Labour amendment, I absolutely agree with everything about the SEN, and I think you acknowledged that you were what you did was went into more detail about some of the things that I tried to skim over. I do have an issue with the second half. It's a bit more difficult for me and that's why I acknowledged what Stephen had been doing in his campaign, because I think more voices on this issue are better than less, and I don't want to end up being in a competitive situation about who's doing more. So, and obviously support the work of the unions. I mean, I had a long chat with them when I went to Lib Dem conference, which is where I've first got the idea of bringing this to this council as cabinet member for education. But more importantly, I don't like splitting the notion of which MP has done more or whatever, because actually I want to work with the MP for Portsmouth. I know what Stephen's doing more because I've seen it on social media, but actually I'd like the MP for Portsmouth North to also be supporting us. And actually, if this notice of motion looks like we're attacking her, she's less likely to embrace what we're trying to do for all kids in Portsmouth. The spirit of this was meant to be that we're all in it together, and actually that councillors and MPs can join unions and teachers and head teachers from academies and otherwise in actually just having a really loud voice. And actually I think we should all be fighting for Portsmouth schools not fighting for the credit of fighting for Portsmouth schools. I think we are all in it together, and I really hope that everyone will pull together and support this motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Horton. Just to reconfirm, we've had one amendment assumed, so therefore we have to do a vote on the first and the third amendments before we go to the substantive. So could I see all those in favour of the first amendment, which is from Councillor Judith Smythe?
That's 5.
All those against? And abstentions? That's lost.
Lost, Lord Mayor. So now.
And now moving on to the third amendment, which as proposed by Councillor Stubbs. All those in favour, please.
Fifteen, Lord Mayor.
All those opposed? And abstentions? Therefore, that one is equally lost. Can we now move to the substantive, which is assumed in the second amendment, please? All those in favour?
Lord Mayor.
All those opposed?
Seven. So that's substantive carried.
Okay, so the substantive is then carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next.
C.
Next. Who's doing it? I apologise. The paperless office means that it's locked out. But back to Councillor Horton for notice of motion C, please. Thank you. You have 3 minutes to persuade us to speak, although you might not wish to use that.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm hoping this can be more straightforward. The idea of actually doing this notice of motion came out of a conversation with Stephen Morgan when we were talking about attendance. But I also realised it was in the pipeline already when Councillor Hockaday was Cabinet Member for Education. So I just hope that we'll get cross-party support in supporting a campaign that benefits all children in Portsmouth.
All those in favour on debating it tonight, please. That's carried. In that case, back to Councillor Horton for your time to propose it.
Seconder. All right, I've done. Okay. Okay, I'm making the assumption that we believe collectively that children and young people are better off in school and that we want to support the council campaign to improve attendance rates in the city, and thought that this was one way of promoting it, sending out a message that we're united in our commitment to work with schools and parents to achieve this. Portsmouth is actually got an improving picture on this situation, but it still is in the bottom quartile for secondary school attendance nationally. Primary is sort of in line with national, and actually there's an optimistic movement towards closing the gap, but actually we want to aspire for higher attendance rates and want it to be above average. So, as stated, 1 in 5 children in the city had at least a week's unauthorised absence from school last year, and actually over 1,000 pupils missed at least one day a fortnight. And it's this erratic and non-consecutive absence that this campaign is really about. It increases disruption in learning and continuity of the whole school experience. It remains a persistent problem over the last few years, and local schools were actually keen to work with the council on a more hard-hitting campaign to complement the strategies that they were already employing in school. The conversations that I had with teachers at one of the workshops in the design phase of the campaign suggested that actually sometimes it's quite nice to have a good cop, bad cop kind of relationship with the local authority, which will give them a little more leverage when which can work in their favour. Back in 2015, the favourite year today, the DFE published a report on the link between absence and attainment in Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 4, and found that in both categories, the higher the percentage of missed sessions, the lower the likely level of attainment. But specifically, pupils who had no absence are 1.5 times more likely to achieve GCSE grades A star to C, 5 of them, or equivalent. And pupils who miss more than 50%, which is obviously a lot, actually only 3% manage to get those qualifications. But as we know, school's not just about exam results, it's also about other opportunities that children might miss out on, things like trips and clubs, visiting speakers, events. Just last week there were events all over the city to do with the Armistice 100 celebrations. But it's also being about part of a community, making friends and learning values, life skills, and how to fit in or how to even deal with conflict. Without these experiences, the chances of social inclusion decrease for these young children and young people, and those with the least qualifications also become the most excluded from other successes. The outline of the campaign, hashtag Miss School, Miss Out, some of it's detailed here, is basically based on the principle that attending school, or also not attending school, is genuinely life-changing. It aims to highlight this message to both children and parents, and has an element of carrot and stick about it. So pushing them to think about the consequences of missed opportunities, as well as the more aspirational element of what every child could become through this notion of a kind of future mirror of yourself. There are slightly different messages for primary and secondary ages, as younger children are obviously more dependent on their parents to get them to the school gates. And the launch focused on a suite of printed and digital materials that schools are using already, and asking them to integrate it into their own school-level campaigns. And there's many examples of how schools are focusing on reversing this cohort of non-attendees. In fact, there's one secondary school in the city that when I visited that had identified Year 7 children who'd already missed a few sessions of school during September, and engaged them in a project which was making a promotional video about how good their school was, to try and make sure that their identity was more with the school and attending. And other schools are using the hashtag and attach it on their day-to-day social media to demonstrate that you'll always be missing something if you're not in school. It's important to highlight that this is aimed at a certain type of absence. It's not aimed at those who have legitimate reason for not being at school, if a child has serious illness or complex needs. Unauthorised absence is the type of thing like going shopping, taking a day off for your birthday, getting up late so not bothering to go in for the rest of the day. Of course, not everything is clear-cut, particularly around minor illnesses, and the next phase of the campaign will be looking at this very issue and supporting parents and students to make decisions in their best educational interest. In fact, there's a pilot with Solent NHS Trust around this. The important thing is that a high-profile campaign in schools is an extra layer of support for schools. So whilst the motion asks the Cabinet to support the campaign, it would be great, really, genuinely, if there was a buy-in from every councillor, so that when you're doing your casework, when you're visiting schools in your ward, when you're talking to voluntary groups, community groups, you're promoting the aspiration of Portsmouth as a city where school attendance and the quality of education is a top priority and something that we can be proud of. In the same way as we shared a collective responsibility and we celebrated children's services earlier on, it would be good to one day be celebrating improved attendance in the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Horton. I think Councillor Young needs to say something.
No, I wanted to speak on the issue.
Oh, sorry. Okay. In which case, Councillor Dowling, do you formally second this? Yeah.
Seconded, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. In which case, we have one amendment. So,
It's been circulated with a green sheet, Lord Mayor.
okay. And the handwriting is very bad, so I'm guessing it's Councillor Saunders.
It's got to come round first. But it's already on the order paper.
It's
See,
already
that's the problem. We can come round again and we can increase the amount of paper we use on these amendments again. Firstly, I would like to congratulate Councillor Horton on actually pushing this campaign forwards. I know when I first became a school governor way back in 1997, I first recognised the need for everyone to attend. It was only 3 and 4 year olds because it was a nursery school. But actually it was important that everyone attended because for the reasons that Councillor Horton has pointed out, it enables people to feel part of something and part of a community, and that's one of the great things that schools have been doing. Later on, I discovered the negative consequences of that. One of the more scarring meetings, not in this authority I hasten to add, but in another authority, was being told that there was a strong link between absenteeism at school and being a persistent and prolific offender. And that was really quite eye-opening to me, and that's why I've been enthusiastic about trying to make sure that people aren't absent, so they can feel part of a community and feel worthful, not worth less. The only small thing I would say is that if we're to do this properly, it should be based on factual information, and I understand that, hence there is a minor drafting error in there, whereby it is unfortunately above average, not below average. I'm sure that we all want to work together to try and make sure that it will be below average, so next time we discuss this amendment is not needed. But as for the campaign as well, which Councillor Horton is leading on, like her, I would say that I hope we can all get behind it, regardless of political party, because our children are more important than party politics. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Saunders. Councillor Smith, do you formally second that amendment, please?
Formally.
Thank you very much. In which case, I now call, the debate is now open, I call on Councillor Young, please.
Sorry. Okay, sorry, apologies. This is something which we in the Education and Children's and Young People Scrutiny Panel have obviously been doing a lot of work on, and next month we will be agreeing the report which will come to Cabinet. So the first thing to say is I hope that the Cabinet will support the recommendations. I think this has been, for us as a scrutiny panel, it's been really, really interesting to talk to schools and to also to people who work with children across the city. And one of the things that really struck me was something that one of the people who came to talk to us said, was that we have an issue here in Portsmouth around county lines, and everyone knows that. And unfortunately, some young people do find themselves involved in this sort of crime. And there was a point made as, how can you argue with a young person when they're earning £500 a day to do this? And my heart sank. My heart sank that, you know, this is the situation that we find ourselves in. And it's very, very difficult to argue with a young person when you're faced with that. But the reality is that their long-term future is really, really impaired. So I endorse this this campaign that the council's run, and there's been campaigns in the past, and some have been successful and some haven't been successful. But one of the things that we've learned is we visited many schools. The members of the panel visited different schools, and myself and Councillor Purvis went to 2 secondary schools, and we heard from both sides secondary schools about some of the challenges that they face. And I think that anything that we can do as a city council to support them to keep children in school is crucial. And the other point that I wanted to kind of go on to talk about is around homeschooling. There are some families who believe in it from an ideological perspective, and I'm really quite comfortable with that. But there are other families who use it as a tool for trying to mask children's absence from school. Oh, it's too hard to get them into school, so we'll just say we're homeschooling. And those are the group of young people who are most at risk of safeguarding issues. So I support this. I think, we've got a long way to go. I just looking through the report, and in 2016-17, 3,500 children had an attendance of below 90%, which is just not acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Young. I now call on Councillor Stagg, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As many of you know, I spent over half of my 42-year teaching career in an inner-city secondary school. And as an inner-city secondary school, we had major problems with non-attendance ongoing. It got better during the 23 years I was there, but it was hard going on many occasions, on a lot of occasions. And one of the first things, I had a group of children coming in at year 7s, the 11-year-olds, and there were 7 of them who could barely read. Now, I didn't blame this on the schools. When you looked at their records, they had had really poor attendance right through their junior schools. And they were at a huge disadvantage from the word go. They couldn't access any of the books that we were using, any of the worksheets. They couldn't write. So what happened was, in most cases, they went into real poor behaviour. They got bored, they disrupted lessons, they affected other children's learning, and so on and so forth. And it was a major problem. They also, long-term, in addition to that, because they had so many gaps in their attendance, they had lost their social position in the school. They had no friends, because the friends had already made their own groups of friends, and these people coming in were interlopers, and so they never sort of settled down. So they felt completely excluded, and their self-esteem went down considerably. Long-term, things like job applications, they couldn't write. They couldn't read job applications. They couldn't get jobs easily. They certainly couldn't do very well at GCSEs and so forth. But I think, yes, attendance is a major problem, but I think we also need to look at the causes. And in lots of cases, I used to go and pick up some children in the mornings because they never actually got to school. So I'd go before school started and pick them up, take them into school. And in a few cases, I bought alarm clocks because they didn't have an alarm clock. I had one boy, I actually informally fostered for a year. His mother wanted to put him into care because he was causing problems, and he wasn't coming to school because they had no food in the house. There was no breakfast. So breakfast clubs in schools are today are a godsend for a lot of families. Parents, it's already been mentioned, parents keep children home very often to let the gas man in or look after the younger children. I had one boy who I noticed when I was looking through records, was never there on a Thursday and Friday. And I thought, hang on a minute, Charlotte Street Market. So I went down there on a Friday, I had a free lesson outside of lunchtime, and lo and behold, there he was working on a stall. And I found out a lot later that his mother kept him home because he had to earn money for the family. And I taught his son later on, and he said to me, I've met him on a few occasions, and he said, I was determined, Mrs. Stagg, never to do the same thing to my son as my mother did to me. So it was hard going. So I think we need to look at some of the causes. Chaotic families is another reason for poor attendance. So we need to look at those problems and work with the parents. And now this is up to the schools, and it's hard work for the schools. And this is where the cuts in the money going into education show, because it's very often it's the learning assistants, teaching assistants rather, who work with the parents and try and encourage them. Many of them had poor experiences in school themselves, so they come into school and they don't value education, so we need to work with those people, and I think this campaign is that sort of thing which will support it all. So I support it, and I hope everybody else will support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stagg. Councillor Elcombe, please.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. Really what I'm looking for, I guess, is a bit of clarification, because obviously I support the campaign. I believe children should be in school. And in my previous occupation, before I joined the council, I was often rounding up these little children who were not where they were supposed to be. The figure of 1 in 5 is, I'm always a bit worried about statistics, and I just wanted to find out from the Cabinet Member for Education what impact the policy over school holidays has had on skewing that data, because at one point every child who was taken out of school during term time, the parent got fined, and obviously that contributed towards the figures of children not being in school. Subsequently, I understand court cases were brought that decided that was not right, because obviously having holidays in non-term time were extremely expensive. So I think,
was that taken into account in the calculations, and if so, by how much? And the other thing is, I'm not sure, because education wasn't really my bag as a councillor. Do we still have truant officers? And if not, why not? Because it's okay these children wander in the streets, but back when I was more active in the city, somebody would go around and find them milling about and grab them and take them back to school. So I don't know whether that still happens, but I'd like some answers to that, Lord Mayor, if I could. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Elcombe. We've not had any other things, so we're moving forward to, I'm assuming that Councillor Horton, you're happy to just assume this amendment in, since it's...
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thanks to Councillor Smythe, who very kindly pointed it out to me last night and assumed, quite rightly, that I'd have done an editing mix-up when I'd amended a sentence. So I thank you for bringing that to my attention before the meeting. So thank you everyone for the positive comments. I don't think there's anything too contentious. Just to go, Councillor Young, the comment you make about the scrutiny, because I obviously was on the scrutiny panel right at the beginning, and I am looking forward to reading the report when it's done. And actually, it's really nice to think that actually all that work that goes into it can really meaningfully filter into a campaign that was started a long while ago and is continuing. So that I look forward to that. And the comments you made about the county lines, I think I absolutely agree with you. I remember the comments as well. And in fact, I was having a conversation with Julian Wadsworth yesterday, because I was talking about what I was going to be doing in this notice of motion, and we agreed that actually some of the stuff that he's dealing with is not really what this campaign is aiming at. However, that doesn't mean to say that those things aren't crucially important. And of course there is a journey that can be had where a child is missing school erratically and then mixes with people, and then before long could be on that the end point of earning that £500 a day. Thank you, Councillor Stagg, for your stories. I can empathise with a lot of them. The one I always remember was when I was teaching Year 6, and there was a kid who kept telling me that he didn't want to come to school because it was so boring. And then I found out that the night before that he'd hot-wired a car and driven it around the local estate. And I was trying to get him to do sentences, structures and spelling. So I don't think I could really easily compete with that. But all joking apart, this is a real challenge for schools if these other risky and exciting things are out there and luring kids away, where we've got a schooling system that has a high emphasis particularly on academic attainment. And I think this all links in when I was talking about the complexity of this whole thing, the whole system, is that some of the issues around special educational needs and the curriculum and non-attendance, once you start unpicking them, you realise how complicated it is. Councillor Elcombe, I'm going to just be honest and say I don't know whether that 1 in 5 is completely subsuming absences. I do know that in the academic year of 2016-17, 215 parents were prosecuted and 150 parents received a financial penalty, which averaged 351. But I will find out whether that 1 in 5, whether that subsumes all holidays or whether they're excluded from it. I do know that that 1 in 5 missing that much school was really aimed at looking at the erratic attendance. So I'm guessing no, but I don't want to say 100%, but I will check it out and I will get back to you. I don't think I have much more to say. I'm really pleased that with the positive comments. This is something, as I said, was started over the last few years. It won't be the only attendance campaign, I'm sure. It will go through this, guys. It's moving on to a next phase of looking at health-related absences, and I'm sure after that it will continue with the feedback that's coming, both from the scrutiny panel, but also the feedback from schools as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Horton. Can we have all those now voting in favour of the notice of motion with this assumed amendment? And anyone against? Abstentions, so that's carried. Moving on swiftly to notice of motion D, town centres. Councillor Stubbs, you have 3 minutes if you wish to use it to persuade us to debate.
No, Lord Mayor, I will take the leader's offer at his word at face value and will waive my right.
Thank you very much. All of those willing to have debate this tonight? It's carried, and back to you, Councillor Stubbs.
Okay, thank you, Lord Mayor. Retail is suffering. Major chains, which we once took for granted, are closing or are shrinking. Just within this last month, we've seen the announcement that the New Look branch on Commercial Road is to close, and the home base at the Ocean Park is also to go. If you walk around the Cascades, you'll find there's more than a dozen empty units, including major stores where BHS and Marks and Spencer's were once located. And of course, this is not just here, it's absolutely everywhere. Any town that you go to, you will find visible signs of decline in the retail sector. Now, one of the things I read online when people are talking about this is, oh, well, it's all down to business rates. That's why all the shops are closing. It's down to business rates, and that is a bit of a myth. Business rates, for one thing, are only increased at the rate of Consumer Prices Index, which is a fairly low measure of inflation. And the recent revaluations that have taken place have had the effect in most parts of the country of reducing bills in the retail sector. Now, there are some exceptions. In parts of the country where the economy has been strongest, bills have gone up, but that is largely confined to London and a few particularly affluent towns such as Oxford and Brighton. So it is a bit of a myth. And you know, when back in the past, when things were going better in retail, large chains were actually quite able to cope with the business rate bills that they got. The problem isn't increasing bills, the problem is changes in patterns of retail spend. And that isn't just about online, although that is a major part of it. It is also about more things shifting to retail parks, and within this whole Greater Portsmouth, South East Hampshire region, the two areas which are doing very well are the retail parks in Waterlooville and in Havant, the spend moves out of town to areas where it's just more convenient to shop in larger units. Where business rates do have an effect is over smaller businesses, over sole traders, and one of the things which I think we're going to need to see more of if retail is to survive and prosper on the high street is going to be a greater role for smaller and independent businesses. And that is one of the things that is needed. I mean, the average changes are obviously there is still some potential for growth in experiential type businesses, whether that's things like nail bars, ice cream parlours, the things that can't move online. I think we also need to see more done to shore up footfall in where that is possible through events and markets and so forth. But of course, local authorities are not large-scale landowners or business, are not large-scale owners of retail premises. And of course, as we all know, there has been a significant financial squeeze. So recently we had the national budget, and I was actually quite surprised because for the first time in many years now, I came out of that thinking, oh well, that's not bad from a local government perspective. We've come out of that with more than we went in with, and we've come out of that with more than we expected, more than I expected certainly. And one of the things that was in there was some measures relating to the high street and relating to retail. So one is the business rate reduction for smaller premises valued at a rateable value of under £51,000, that I think is very welcome. And the other is the creation of a substantial fund for local authorities to bid into for schemes which shore up town centres, which try to support footfall, which try to just maximise the opportunities that are still there, because outside of the biggest centres, as I said, everywhere else is suffering. I mean, some of the big ones are actually holding up okay. Southampton is in better shape because it is destinations like West Quay that hold up, but actually within Portsmouth, Gun Wharf is holding up really well as well, because these are the things which are bringing people in. But it's the other day-to-day, smaller scale centres, such as our Commercial Road, which need help. It's interesting at the national level, the strategy makes clear while the rules aren't laid out, one of the things it won't support is things which are about creating additional retail space, because there is recognition that across the country as a whole, this is a permanent structural change. It isn't just a temporary dip. And on the whole, we are going to need to have a managed pathway for reducing the amount of space which is devoted to retail uses. But obviously, within this city, because we missed out on the northern quarter, we are actually a little behind, so there might still be some potential for growth in the city centre, but it's going to be limited. However, we do need to shore up what we've got. Even if something is built on the northern quarter site, it will be many years away, and we need to do something now, and there is an opportunity to bid into funding available from the government to do just that. So this motion is asking the Cabinet, once the rules become clear about exactly what you can bid for and what you can't, to file a bid.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stubbs. Councillor Jones, do you formally second the note?
Yeah, formally second.
Thank you very much. Okay, and now moving on to the debate. I haven't received any amendments, so I'm assuming there aren't any, and therefore I call the first speaker, Councillor Udy, please.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I just want to say I totally agree with this motion. When I came into council, I had a couple of things on my mind, priority-wise, for Charles Dickens, and Commercial Road was definitely one of those things. We're witnessing firsthand the death of the High Street. I could go back to when I was a teenager 20 years ago and absolutely looking forward at the weekends to meeting my friends at the Fountain, having a great time in town all day, maybe getting 2 hamburgers and 2 fries, £2, and then maybe messing about in the food court in Cascades. Do you know what I mean? It was. You could go to town and you could spend all day at town. You even had bowling. Remember bowling? Anyway, I just want to say that as we've gone forward, I've talked to officers in the council, because I've been talking about things about box parks that I've come across in London as I visited as a punter, and I want to talk about Eastleigh High Street, where hopefully Southsea Brewery might be moving in with a microbrewery soon, and just small retail units that could be let up for cultural change, driven maybe by alcohol and craft breweries, or by food units, or just little independent retailers. I'd like to work with as many people to try and, I want to say, sort out Commercial Road. I don't really mean it like that, but I hope you catch my drift. I know that we might have to reduce the space, but if we look going forward, the top of Commercial Road, which was obviously going to be part of the Northern Quarter, but it's not anymore, and Taco Bell are moving there pretty soon, and I think that's a really positive thing for the top of Commercial Road, because it should drive massive footfall for such a popular chain restaurant that's finally coming to Portsmouth, that I would say is vaguely affordable for a lot of people, and goes hand in hand with a massive uplift of the Commercial Road McDonald's now that it uses Uber Eats, because anyone who's been in the Commercial Road McDonald's on a Saturday sees about 20 or 30 drivers waiting to take deliveries. So there is money in the top of town, it's just utilising it and putting the right units there, the right people. I don't know who owns a lot of the units downtown, and I'd like to find out more about that, but I would only assume it's different landlords and not the council at all. So it's holding these people to account to hopefully rent out properties in more of an affordable way to drive change down in Commercial Road, and then with all the development opportunity that is happening, but working hand in hand so local communities that have been there for years can use it as well. So I support this motion. Cool.
Thank you very much, Councillor Udy. I now call upon Councillor Tompkins, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In April 2012, I have photographic evidence of me standing next to Philip Hammond on the steps of the King's Theatre. It was my first time trying to get elected. I lost fair and square to Councillor Mason. No problem there. And as I was standing next to him on the steps, very close, because the photographer kept telling us to get closer, get closer, get closer. I just whispered in his ear, please reduce business rates. Okay? This was before he was Chancellor, so obviously I saw the future, but there you go. I think he was a Minister in Defence at the time or something, but that was then. But, of course, seriously though, I heartily welcome the Chancellor's decision to cut business rates. It's one of those things that do bug me as a businessman, even though I don't personally benefit from this cut in retail rates, but it is something where, talking to shopkeepers, etc., I mean, they get annoyed about it, because it does feel like a bit of a cash grab by governments. We don't even get our bins emptied for that money we pay, and for example, I pay £19,000 a year to Portsmouth Council for that, and you know, I don't mind paying my bit, but we don't feel we get anything for that, really. That is the case people like me feel anyway. And also, it restricts me growing my business. I'm not saying I'm going to keep all that money, but I could do a lot with that money, and I like expanding, I like hiring staff. I want to employ people. So it's one of those things, when the Chancellor announces, I was delighted, and also for those small business owners who work very, very hard, and they do a great job. All of us here, I suspect we're going to have a lot of agreement on this to a point, apart from, you know, maybe the tax issue, but none of us want to see our city centre die. We don't like going past these big empty shops with, you know, no vinyls in the window, whatever. We don't like going past that. Our town centre is vital to the cohesion and identity of our city. We all know that. It's often said it's all internet shopping killing it. Councillor Stubbs makes some very good points about when you think outside the box on this thing, it can really change the way people shop. I mean, internet shopping is not a new thing. We've been doing it for well over 10 years now. So maybe a different strategy is needed in this case. But I think there'll always be demand for small shops with good personal service. It's good. I'm sure it will carry on, but let's make it easy for them. That's my thing. Let's encourage more people to start businesses, and retail especially, because it's great for the area. Sometimes it seems to me that many forget that without a clear structure of fiscal encouragement for business and entrepreneurs, those that suffer eventually are people who depend upon tax revenues for the public spending that many rely on. Yeah? So all I would say, to appeal to everyone this Christmas, and everyone outside the chamber, even to hardcore socialists, hug a local business person. On a side note, just a little afterthought. Walking down Commercial Road today, I was appalled to hear Fairy Tale of New York played loud. Not because of some of the risky words in the song, but because it's the 13th of November. The Christmas market had just been set up, and I hear one of my favourite songs blasted out, and I'm thinking, I don't want to hear that now. It's not even December. Come on, guys. So we need a sweeping ban on Shaking Stevens until December the 1st. And then, come December, we can all enjoy it, we can all love Christmas, love all the songs we hear every year, but please, shopkeepers, chain stores, Christmas markets, not just yet, please. And that's my final point. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tompkins. I now call upon Councillor Dowling, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I thought, as the relevant Cabinet member, I should say a few words on this motion. In terms of the motion itself, yes, completely agree, Councillor Stubbs. Perhaps you are slightly redeemed in my eyes following the previous debate given the topic. Completely agree. Important that we support local high streets, and when we do know the detail, we will absolutely be putting in a bid for that particular fund. I just thought I'd address a couple of the other bits and pieces that have come up in the debate, Lord Mayor. Firstly, Councillor Udy, I think you mistakenly called Milton Market Eastney High Street, but that's okay. You are forgiven. Obviously, the Milton Market Traders Association and Milton Market Fund Day Committee might have a slightly different opinion, but that's totally okay. But yes, you absolutely welcome the positive signs of bringing new people to that row of shops. So really pleasing. In terms of box parks, we're absolutely in favour of bringing a box park to the city, and I hope we can do that in the next year to 18 months. I know we've already had one slight kind of passing conversation about it, but I'm happy to have more conversations about it. In terms of the city centre more widely, we've got the city centre master plan coming up relatively soon, and we will be starting member engagement on that in the new year. I would please encourage members to engage with that member engagement option. The last time we had a workshop open to all members for the local plan, for example, it was myself, Councillor Mason, Councillor Wington, Councillor Smythe, Councillor Chowdhury, Councillor Stubbs, And I think that was it. So out of 42 of us, we had maybe 6 of us. Now, I appreciate people's diaries are very busy, and I've not laboured that point too much, but please do engage with the City Centre Master Plan when it comes forward for consultation with members, and then following that with members of the public. In terms of the cascades specifically, yes, we do need to make sure we engage with Railpen, who own the Cascades. I've got another meeting with them coming up in the next few weeks, and I'll be sure to relay some of the feelings and thoughts that have been said today. So I think that's really important. I think Councillor Tompkins and myself probably have a slightly different opinion when it comes to Christmas, how we should celebrate it, the impact of it, etc., etc. We've got Small Business Saturday coming up on the 1st of December. I would encourage councillors to get involved with that. You know, have your say on social media, go and speak to local traders, support them, etc., etc. We've got a number of things coming up given the time of year. I'm pleased that we'll be bringing a lot of Christmas lights to the city, including in some areas where we've not had them previously. The details of that will be going around relatively soon. We're trying to confirm a date with our providers about exactly when that will be. We've got the Christmas market, which has already been alluded to. It's a new provider this year. I went down last Saturday. I would absolutely encourage others to do so. It's really, really positive. And finally, I would just remind people that if they do wish to engage in Christmas cheer before the 1st of December, then there are things such as Heart Christmas, which plays Christmas music non-stop on the radio. So if you have a digital radio, you can do that. And we also have Christmas Movies 24, which circulates Christmas films 24 hours a day. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dowling. I now call upon Councillor Saunders, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm always glad when I go into a parallel universe. We've had today Councillor Ferret discussing the merits of Brexit in debates on school cuts. We've had Councillor Tompkins discussing the merits of a ban on shaky, I have to say, which is something I remember vividly whilst walking around Councillor Udy did Cascades, I did Wimpy and Fine Fair and the Tricorn and Charlotte Street, and what I constantly listened to was Shakin' Stevens. So a ban might be quite useful, but it's always good to hear a discussion about the commercialisation of Christmas and a Christmas movie channel as well. But I think in between all that, so far we've had some quite thoughtful and realistic discussions led by Councillor Stubbs on the merits of our high streets. I just have a few observations. I think the two things, as colleagues have said, are highly, highly welcome, but I would suggest adding 2 or 3 things to it. Firstly, with regards to the rateable value. That's something that's particularly relevant in the area I represent. Thanks to Councillor Stagg, Councillor Smith have led the campaign to try and stop one of our off licences selling super strength lagers, which has been a cause of antisocial behaviour, and we're trying to get the other one to do it, but the other one won't do it until we lobby for them to have a cut in business rates. I suspect that their income is less than £51,000. And so as a result of Theresa May's end of austerity, we are now possibly able to get them to do that, and in order to make sure we can reduce antisocial behaviour in the south of the Baffins area. And if that is worth it, that makes this policy on its own worth it. I would say, though, to Councillor Stubbs, you're right, it's not just business rates. There's also a major issue with high rents as well. And that's an issue that the market is failing on, and I'm not quite sure whether the government is going forwards with regards to ending that. When we come to look at what to do with the fund, I will make a suggestion in a couple of areas. Firstly, to look at the secondary high streets. In the area Councillor Stagg, Councillor Smith and I represent, we've got 3 of them. We have Tangier Road, we have Copner Road, and we have Milton Market. All of them have got great shops. All of them have got great independent shops, and all of them, I'm sure, would benefit from actually being involved in this fund. If the ministry, and Lord knows the ministry is capable of fouling up a few things in the small print, but if the ministry is capable of encouraging those secondary high streets like that, in the fund, then I think that that will help encourage a sense of community and encourage growth in communities. We can't, Commercial Road is absolutely crucial to our city centre, as is Palmerston Road, as is Cosham. But we need to look at secondary high streets as well, because very often they're the engine of the growth of communities. And I think the second thing is to recognise and celebrate the work done by local groups. So tomorrow night, Councillor Stagg, Councillor Smith and I will be attending a meeting of a lovely organisation called Love Baffins, which is overseeing a Christmas market which has become an institution over the last few years, as you, Lord Mayor, well know. And that's a huge thing. That's had a massive impact on local businesses. People locally go there who would never have gone there before. And anecdotally, we pick up evidence that trade increases, not just on those weeks, not just in the run-up to Christmas, but all year round. And that's down to a group of volunteers. And oh, by the way, Councillor Stagg has some raffle tickets for the Christmas market. If you wish to buy them, please queue up afterwards. But we're not alone. Councillor Dowling has already talked about Milton Market and his fantastic work around Halloween. But there are so many other areas in our city where small groups and communities are coming together to help improve our shopping areas, whether it's the carnivals in Paulsgrove and in Portsea, whether it's the Love Copner event, whether it's the fantastic work done by Fratton Big Local, or whether it's the amazing work of Love Southsea, which Councillor Tompkins will well know about, because it's helped rejuvenate our areas, as is the same in Castle Road. And so I would encourage any bid that goes forwards to recognise that work and to encourage the development of local community groups so that we can actually get something from the bottom up rather than has happened too often in the past from the top down. So I would welcome this motion from Councillor Stubbs and Councillor Jones. I'm pretty sure that we will be bidding for the cash once we know how the fund will work, but I would say that it should encourage all our high streets, not just the main ones, and it should recognise the fantastic work that many local people do, because they all, like us, want to make our high streets better. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Saunders. And I now call upon Councillor George Fielding, please.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I'm just going to keep it brief. We're in full support of the motion. We'd like to also highlight some of the work that we've been doing in terms of Stephen Morgan, Judith Smythe and myself in Southsea, in terms of the Shop Local campaign that's been going on in support of small businesses. In terms of the economy, for every £1 you spend in a local shop, 63 pence goes straight back into the economy, and it is, of course, the greener choice to shop local, so anything that we can be done to support that is a good thing. So we welcome the reduction in business rates, as it should help small businesses throughout the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being so succinct, and I call upon Councillor Ferret.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This council can do some weird and surprising things at time, and certainly finding myself in alignment with Councillor Stubbs and Councillor Udy is really surprising. Nevertheless, Councillor Udy is correct that we've got to look at how we reinvent the high street. We can get nostalgic about how things used to be, but we all recognise that, as Councillor Stubbs has said with his usual cold, hard logic, I just wish that cold, hard logic could be applied with some of the senior people in his party. And I make no apology for talking about Brexit at every opportunity, because the way I look at it, everything is provisional at the moment in terms of when we're looking at finances, when we're looking at what the government are going to do. Anyone tracking it this afternoon will see the government is again in a state of advanced disintegration. So I make no hesitation, Brexit is clearly going to have an impact, is having an impact, and could have quite a grave impact in terms of the resources that are going to be available to us. In terms of business rates, I don't know if I do entirely agree with Councillor Stubbs on that, because clearly fixed costs do have an impact on a business, particularly if there is declining footfall, and that's something in terms of those fixed costs such as business rates and rents are not faced by the online retailers in the same way. So whatever alleviation can be done on that is welcome, and clearly the £675 million that's referred to in the motion will be welcome. However, if you extrapolate that across the number of constituencies in the country, This says about England, but I suppose even if you take the 550 constituencies in England, you're still talking about not much more than £1 million for each of them. And in terms of what looks like an incoherence to me in terms of the government's approach, I understood that we were going to become dependent as councils more on business rates, and with the grant being cut, so we would get to a stage where we would have to be totally reliant on business rates to substitute for the disappearance of the grant. And if that is the case, then I don't know where that leads us if we're going to be cutting business rates, and if there's an acceptance that the high street's struggling and we're going to lose big shops and the business rates that go with that. I don't know how the government how they can expect councils to operate with no grant in an environment where the high street is diminishing and business rates are falling.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ferret. I now call upon Councillor Hugh Mason.
Lord Mayor, since we've heard about some of the shopping centres around the city, the secondary shopping centres, I think it is only sensible to mention those in Southsea, which are having a really bad time. They're having great difficulty. Roads such as Albert Road, where the Albert Road Traders Association are having great difficulty in paying the rents. Indeed, one of the shops is has appeared in the national press for the difficulty that he is having in paying the rent. But he is not alone. Also in Marmion Road, these are distinctive shops, but gradually the balance between retail and service is moving inexorably towards services, towards cafes, towards nail bars, towards tattoo parlours, and if the balance goes too far, then I think that it will be very difficult for small traders to grow, small traders to start up again. And so I certainly welcome this motion, and I also welcome the reduction in business rates for retail premises below 51,000, because I think it might help to offset some of the increases in rents which people are seeing. But I think that the money which is coming to us, if we do manage to get a few 100,000 out of the government to support high streets, one of the important things is to do for our secondary centres what we have been doing and do it more, do it better, which is to have events in our secondary centres which attract people in, and so that they do spend in our secondary centres. Milton Market has done this, Albert Road has tried it in the past. Where it works very well, and I think that we as a council can still do more to support our small business traders. And I think it is essential that we should do so, otherwise we lose very much of the character of our city, things which we personally, I think most of us, would value. That mixture of retail, the eccentric retail, the small retail, the village shops, which we still have in this city, unlike many other cities. And I think it is important that we should do what we can to support them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mason. I now call upon Councillor Lyon.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And very brief, really. This is simply to make a point that Councillor Saunders was mentioning. I think about 2 off-licences around Hope House. Actually, I don't often blow my own trumpet, but I think I can take credit for having gone down to licensing and asked them to look at these 2 shops and make sure they weren't selling, as they were, as it turns out, alcohol to people who were already drunk and at the wrong kind of price. So yes, there has been some sanction against them, but I do think that this side of the House did something about it, because we received an email, I did as Deputy Chairman of Licensing, and bothered to go and see them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lyon. I have no further speakers indicated to speak. Therefore, I return it back to Councillor Stubbs to sum up, please.
Okay, thank you, Lord Mayor. I think it's been an interesting debate. There are 1 or 2 points which people have raised, which I'll just make a couple of quick comments on. So, starting with Councillor Udi, yes, when you were talking about the north end of Commercial Road and the opening of Taco Bell, and that being a positive thing, I absolutely would concur with that. And one of the things I think we need to look at actually is our city centre policies, which currently restrict cafe and food outlet use. Now, those policies have been in there for a very good reason, which is simply that if we're going to get a development on the Northern Quarter, then, you know, they have to almost be able to cherry pick the profitable parts if they're actually going to build it. The problem that we're facing is that any such development is at the very least 5 years away, and if we have 5 years of continued decline, then we, you know, it's, I don't want to sound melodramatic, but we could get into a pretty terminal situation. So I do think we need to look at things which drive footfall now, and one of those is about the number of food outlets in the city centre. You frequently see complaints, I see them online all the time, about there not being places to eat beyond the likes of Subway or McDonald's, and there's nothing much else in the city centre. I see it all the time. I see the lamenting back to the food court, you know, and the Facebook groups, that comes up very frequently. Councillor Tompkins mentioned, you know, what do businesses see for the business rates, and I accept that. They're essentially a national tax. It's one of the ways we pay for social care and so forth, and it's regrettable in a way that we can't take some of that and set that aside for businesses. With other cost pressures on councils, obviously that's been proven to be, you know, just too big an ask. Councillor Sanders mentions rents and high rents, and I think that it's in some way analogous to the situation with student housing, that landlords are reluctant to take lower rents, but over time they're going to have to get used to it. And just the same way that rates and the rent bill for some of those houses will come down, so the rents for retail will come down, or the units will just stand empty, and that will be the sanction for it. And you know, there is quite a diversity in ownership. It's not as though there's one person, well, it's not generally that there's one big landowner, so there will be competition to fill up the spaces available. John Sterrett mentions problems about potential dependence on business rates in the future. But I actually see this in some ways as a positive thing. So at the moment, the size of the grants that the councils get is less than the other half the business rates that we don't get. So if we got all of the business rates now across whatever the distribution would be, but across local government as a whole, we'd be slightly better off. And now, of course, the government isn't actually going to give us extra money. They'll do this in such a way that will take on extra burdens. There has been talk in the past about things like attendance allowance, which is something from a local government perspective would not want to have to pay for that out of the business rates. And in some ways it is better that we take on the business rates into local government with these reductions being made first, rather than take on extra responsibilities funded by this money and then find this extra money dries up because the retail sector in future, you know, the amounts of rates paid reduce. And I think also I'd like to agree with Councillor Mason when he talks about the importance of events, and also really related to that, the importance of self-help, that it is contingent on local shopping centres and in fact the city centre for the businesses to do more to act together to drive footfall than that, and events is part of that. And one of the weaknesses of the commercial road area is that there isn't enough of businesses working together to drive footfall, to keep things going. Everyone's focused too much on their own small part of the problem, rather than the big picture of if there's no people walking down Commercial Road, then no one's got a viable business. So I do hope that we're able to get some funding out of this. I recognise that, I mean, you know, the paperwork talks about bids of up to 25 million, but clearly you're not going to be accepting, the government cannot accept very many bids on that scale without spending the entire fund. So realistically, we're probably looking at a significantly lesser amount, but nonetheless, this is a part of the economy where the amount of help we're able to provide at the moment is very limited, and I hope in the future it'll be possible to do more.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stubbs. We now move to the vote. So can I see all those in favour, please show. Anyone against? Abstained? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Members, there are 12 questions under Standing Order 17 that have been previously circulated to you. As you know, there's a total of 45 minutes allocated within the standing orders to deal with questions. Can I remind everyone that the member asking the original question may ask up to 2 supplementaries questions that must arise directly out of the original question. Any other member is limited to 1 supplementary question that must arise directly out of the original question or the replies. Can I call on Councillor Bosher to ask question 1 to answer by Councillor Bernard-Jackson?
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Question number 1, standing in my name to the Leader of the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bosher. Speaking on behalf of the Cabinet, no such action would be contemplated without first taking officer advice. Officers are in attendance at meetings to advise us on meetings and decision-making procedures.
Councillor Bosher.
You clearly know that I'm referring to a meeting that was held in July of this year. Does this Leader of the City Council, though, think it's appropriate that, having been advised otherwise and with alternative Cabinet members in the building, that to proceed along this line was perhaps ill-advised by the Cabinet member in question?
My understanding was that there was advice about how the Cabinet member should proceed, and that advice was followed, but the advice changed.
Councillor Bosher.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. The advice actually changed when I pointed out to the relevant Cabinet member that what she was doing was actually inappropriate and couldn't actually be done. It was actually something that I actually highlighted to the Deputy Leader of the City Council about an hour before the meeting when I asked him whether he would actually be there. Again, does the Leader of the City Council think it's appropriate that a Cabinet member should actually consider changing a democratic, publicly available report, other than the recommendations, in order to remove a declaration of interest? It is a simple yes or no answer, Councillor Bernard-Jackson.
My understanding is that the councillor concerned was following the advice of council officers.
Having had no sign of further supplementaries, I now move on to question 2 from Councillor Hockaday to be answered by Councillor Wharton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Question 2 in my name.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The capital funding allocated for Fox's Forest School related to works planned at Hillsey Lines, I understand, that area of the city. Scrutiny of what was required to make a difference in the forest provision on that site took place in October 2018, and following discussions, a range of improvements were identified, including refurbishment, one of the casements, to provide an indoor space for pre- and post-activity talks and providing cover near the fire circle. The works to improve the area have been commissioned and are being put in place. The improvements were discussed with relevant stakeholders, and it's anticipated that they will add value to the Hillsey Lines provision for schools and also local residents.
Thank you, Susie. So would this be an actual forest school then, and what are the timescales on this?
The forest school thing is an interesting one, because I understand, because I've done early years practitioner things, that for a while I was seeking for some definition about what type of forest school was, because it's a particular philosophy of early years education, and also schools which are set up, which I understand, from what I can see, it was not what this was intended for. What was the last, the second bit of it? Oh, and the timeline is, I haven't actually got a timeline at the moment, but I understand it would probably be after Christmas, but I can get that information and get back to you.
Any more councillors? Yeah.
Sorry, just one more. Has there been any lobbying done to ensure there's any funding or any contact made with the Forestry Commission?
No.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much. Would the Cabinet member agree to speak to Alison Bean, the head at Mary Rose School? Because Councillor Hockaday and I visited the Mary Rose School earlier this year. It might have been this time last year. And Alison was telling us about how to have that kind of experience on a regular basis for children with special educational needs. They have to take them all the way to the New Forest, and it does seem sort of a crying shame when we are a very densely populated city, but quite unique to have a forest, you know, a woodland area within our city, which is very, very unusual in the UK. And that's where the idea really emanated from. And I just think, whilst as Portsmouth City Council and our Parks and Gardens team and, you know, Pete the Park Ranger at Hillsey Lines, whilst we can all have some ideas about a good forest school, actually there is a successful one in the New Forest. Our schools in Portsmouth are travelling there. I think Highbury School also go there as well. And rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, we could actually learn from those schools what they like and don't like that's there. And that could be a good way of taking it forward maybe slightly quicker as well.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I will talk to Alison B.
No more. Councillor Brent.
Just a quick question. What cross-directorate work and multi-agency work looking for the funding and different streams of funding have been looked into for this project?
There's been cross-directorate work with C&L, and in terms of external funding, there's not been any sort.
Councillor Dowling.
Could the Cabinet member talk to us a little bit about the amount of official paperwork that officers had to give the Cabinet member upon taking on her role in relation to the Forest School?
I understand that there was no paperwork trail to go from.
Now calling on question 3 from Councillor Peter Harris to be answered by Councillor Fodder.
Question 3 in my name, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, first of all, Councillor, for your question. A comprehensive review of the Hackney carriage and private hire trade was undertaken back in 2016 I can't read my own writing here, consultation with various stockholders, including taxis, private hire trade. The licensing committee and the council approved to adopt the policy on the 24th of February 2016 and the 22nd of March 2016. The licensing policy is intended to be reviewed if required by the licensing committee every 3 years, which means that members of the committee will be asked to review its current policy in 2019. In the meantime, members and officers have been keeping the current policy under review and have listened to the taxi and private hire trade about the input and the policy, and its changes are needed. The licensing manager has brought to my attention a number of matters which are considered to be particularly of importance both to the trade and also to the protection of the public, and also therefore requested that the licence committee consider an interim review this year of a certain areas of policies, which includes increases of age limit for vehicles to the first licence of 3 years or 4 years, that is including temporary vehicles, and consideration of the taxi fare rise and the Hackney carriages, and that is to be approved by the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation. Inclusion of further guidance in relation to relevance of convictions to include immigration offences such as people trafficking and possession and supply of drugs. Amendments to wording of the conditions and guidance in respect of the convictions in line with the request from members of the licensing committee to ensure that it's clarified and understood by the licensing holders. So what have I done? Since I got the job, I've asked officers to prepare a report to the licensing committee, and that meeting will be held on Thursday the 21st of March 2019, so that members can approve and the scope and have a look at it in the scope for the review. As chair of the licensing committee, I think that it was very important to meet with the taxi and private hire trade on a regular basis so that I have the opportunity to discuss issues with the councillors and that they feel which is stuff which is important. I then task officers to arrange a meeting between the licensing committee and the Hackney carriage and private hire trade representatives, and that took place on the 26th of July 2018. As I said, I only had the job a couple of months, and I called them in to talk to them, and we had a meeting there when I first became chair. The topics that we covered were taxi ranks, vehicle age limits, proposed fare rises, and a promotion of Hackney carriage and private hire industry. So a further meeting for the group is to be on Monday, the 7th of January. I haven't got a time yet, but we propose to meet with them. As I said, when I first met with them, I said that I wanted 6 months to sort of have a list of jobs that we wanted to look at, and we would feed back to them. And as I said, Monday the 7th of January 2019. As a final comment, I think the taxi and private hire trade within Portsmouth are clearly passionate about this city and have shown that they want to work with Portsmouth City Council, and so do we. Standards of licensing drivers, vehicles and operators, as well as promoting Portsmouth as a great place to work and visit. I hope that answers your question.
Councillor Peter Harris.
That was very comprehensive, Councillor Fuller. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got another one though.
All right, carry on.
Could the Chair of Licensing update members on how the Council is managing CCTV in vehicles and ensuring that drivers are updating their details as data controllers following over a year since CCTV become mandatory in private hire and Hackney vehicles?
I can answer it a little bit, but obviously I'm not, I should know more about it. But what I will tell you is that I was in a taxi yesterday and the taxi drivers were talking about it, and that they said that it's going to be mandatory to put in. I don't really know much more than that, I'll be quite honest, but I will find out and get back to you. Again, I think meeting with them in January as well is very important, and obviously that's one of the things that I know is on the agenda, so I will try and get back to you with that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Peter Harris.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Councillor Fuller, if you could, when you get that information, would you be able to circulate it around the chamber?
I'm happy to circuit that to make sure you have an email on all members here, Councillor. And again, thank you for your question.
Councillor Stubbs.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It's good to hear there's going to be a review. My understanding for so far as private hire is concerned is that in many respects the restrictions for vehicles registered in Portsmouth is stricter than in many neighbouring authorities in terms of age of vehicle and so forth. Are you concerned that the effect of that is to encourage many Portsmouth-based taxis to seek registration from neighbouring districts?
I think it is a concern. Again, I don't know the full answer to it. I'll gladly circulate when I speak to the officers and speak to them and get the answer back to you, Councillor. So, but I am concerned, yes.
Councillor Jonas.
Through you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Fuller, would you agree with me that the taxi driver that took us home Sunday was most efficient and courteous?
I think that was your wife, wasn't it, Councillor? Yeah, but she did charge me £10 as well, Councillor.
Councillor Vernon Jackson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I wonder if the Chairman of Licensing would support the work that we've been doing to work with the Hampshire councils through the Hampshire Local Government Association to make sure that we try to coordinate all licensing standards for private hire and Hackney licences, so that we don't get people registering in one place and then plying their trade in another, and we pull everybody up to the highest possible standards to protect both drivers and passengers.
Leader, I know you were at the meeting, the very first meeting that I did, and that was one of the questions that we were talking about, and that is very much at the forefront, in my opinion, and I know that the taxi people are very, very happy of the way things are going, and I do feel that we're making headlines with them, and we're getting a lot of respect from them, which is good. So my thing is, I want to work with them. That's the best thing to do. We all want to, for what they do.
Thank you very much. I now call upon Councillor Coles for his question to be answered by Councillor Dowling.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. Question 4 in my name.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I can obviously give a bit of an update, and I will go through a few bits and pieces, particularly from the last 6 months in a moment. I thought I'd use this as an opportunity to quickly mention to members that aren't already aware that we as an administration are bringing back something called the Corporate Projects Board. This is something that the Council previously had a number of years ago, and this was to ensure that there is cross-party oversight of the major projects that will inevitably need to continue regardless of who the administration is, Tipner being a key example for that, including things like the city centre, and going forward I think air quality will also be something that would require cross-party overview. So the first meeting and this time round, the makeup of that body, as it currently stands, is due to be group leaders and group spokespeople for PRED. So for yourself, Councillor Coles, there'll be Councillor Smythe and Councillor Morgan. But I see no reason why some of the papers for those meetings can't be circulated to all councillors as well, to provide that kind of comprehensive overview, because these are big, major projects and they require overview from all councillors. In terms of recent work in relation to Tipner specifically, land ownership is obviously a significant factor in a lot of the work that's going on there, the majority of the land being held by TRC, the Tipner Regeneration Company, and that has proven a difficulty over a number of years. I'm sure Councillor Jones and Councillor Stubbs, as my predecessors, will happily confirm and nod along to that kind of idea. Homes England, formerly the Homes and Communities Agency, holds the other significant bit of land. I spent the first few months of my time as the Cabinet member trying to convince Homes England to sell their land to us so that we could get on and build something, because it's had planning consent since 2011. It's now 2018 and that has not come forward. We are very keen, and we spoke loudly about it at the election, that we bring something forward on Tipner fast, as it's been dormant for a bit too long. I don't particularly blame any previous administration for that work. There's a lot of factors involved, but we're keen that we try and get things moving. Homes England have refused, despite considerable lobbying at a lot of levels around that. So they are moving forward with engaging contractors and a new development partner. So we are working with Homes England and the Tipner Regeneration Company to kind of act as almost a middleman between those two parties to hopefully bring them better together. I think that's a process that, while still at the early stages, is going relatively well, all things considered. We should hopefully know more detail about exactly who their new partner is in the new year, but we are continually pushing them to give us information. Personally, my preference would have been for them to give us the land, and in order for the council and the new development team to kind of move as fast as possible, but we're not in that position. In terms of Tipner West, we've obviously got a number of people currently on site, including the Harbour School, the Nautical Training Corps, Tipner Boating and Angling Club, and the Portsmouth Harbour Cruising Club. They are all under PCC ownership and have various leases, but we're in constant communication with them, and they are aware and have been aware for a number of months, if not years, that they will have to relocate, and we're working with them on those relocation plans. In terms of the firing range, the land transfer from the MOD will hopefully take place soon, as in the next few weeks. We anticipate that and are feeling very positive about it. I'll say a couple of things about Country Park. I know it's not strictly Tipner, but obviously we've got that coming forward, and the planting, landscaping and roadworks will be complete by the end of March 2019. That is by no means a comprehensive update. I'm sure there's lots more I could say. The original briefing for this question was many pages. We tried to narrow it down to 2 pages of bullet points. There will be a comprehensive paper available to all councillors for the first Major Projects Board. I'm happy to answer specifics if people have them.
Thank you much. Councillor Cole, supplementary.
Thank you for that. Should the council have the opportunity... Thanks. Should the council have the opportunity to build any housing there, would the Cabinet member commit today to making them 100% social council housing?
As the administration, we are very clear that we would like to see a considerable amount of social and affordable housing going on, not just in Tipner, but across the city. Any plan going forward will be subject to a full business case. If it's possible to do a good development that is 100% social, then we will obviously work towards that, but I'm not going to hold myself to something if it's not financially possible. I think colleagues would not want me to be so risky with public finance.
Councillor Cole.
Thank you. Has any assessment been made into improving the transport links to that part of the city as part of looking into the development?
Yes, absolutely, and I suspect Councillor Steig can probably talk in more detail than I can. But yes, and we're currently in the process of putting, through to the next phase for a bid in terms of our bus rapid transport, which I keep saying wrong, so I should stop saying it. Plan going forward, but I'm happy to discuss it further if need be.
Councillor Peter Harris.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can the Cabinet member update me on why residents in Hillsview were not consulted following the decision to allocate the Doyle Avenue site for 58 homes at the Cabinet meeting last month? And why weren't ward councillors also consulted?
Because we're very early on in the process, and the development team will be very active in consulting with ward councillors and with members of the public going forward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, well, great point by Councillor Coles over there about 100% social housing. We all know Liberal Democrats can make a profit from social housing. Former Councillor Lee Hunt put literature out everywhere saying it's possible. So we'll look forward to 100% social housing at Tipner. But my question is, I wonder if the Cabinet Member Councillor Dowling can update us on the bridge, the proposed bridge from Tipner West across to the Country Park area, and whether or not any sort of civil engineering company or company like WSP have actually been appointed to start the design work on that yet.
Appointed, no, but we are very close to that position. Again, I feel like Councillor Side could probably give a more detailed update off the top of her head, but we are getting very close to that position. So, yeah, and I suspect by the time we have the major projects board, there'll be an update on that.
Councillor Stubbs.
The government is currently revising housing targets for local authorities across the country, and obviously as things stand, we don't know what the level of development here will be, but at least it must be possible that there will be pressure to increase development targets. That being the case, what is the housing target proposed for Tipner, and are there options to increase that number to bear some of the burden if that becomes necessary?
So the current published figure in the current local plan is obviously 1,250 for Tipner, which I'm sure you know, Councillor Stubbs. We'll be looking at options going forward, of course we will, and in the local plan revised issues and options coming forward to Cabinet in February, that will outline a few more details. But as you say, it's very difficult to hit a moving target, and it's something that is constantly under review. And Toby Ayling, who is our head of planning policy, is obviously working very hard with his team on that.
Councillor Madden.
Thank you. Could the cabinet member, would the cabinet member agree with me? That's the word, isn't it? Would the cabinet member agree with me that this, the development of Tipner has been completely difficult over the years? This goes back to before you were born, of course, yeah. Yeah, and it goes back to various administrations, including one that I happen to be involved in. There had been some things happen. We had the DD, what do you call it? What did you take it all the rubbish out? Oh, I can't remember. Decontamination.
Right. Yes.
That's the word. We had the decontamination. We've had various plans come forward. We had various people pull out. But what I'd want to make sure is that whatever the final result is, east and west, that in fact we won't compromise whatsoever on the development itself and what we want to see as a city council.
Yes, I agree. No, let me start again. I agree it's been long-lasting as an ongoing project. Indeed, before I was born. Thank you for highlighting that, Councillor Madden. And no, we will not be compromising because it's such an important strategic site for the city.
Councillor Saunders.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Does the Cabinet member welcome the offer by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government to work with the Planning Department here in order to reduce the gap between what they're telling us we should be doing and the amount of homes we can theoretically build?
Yeah, absolutely welcome that help and advice, but I suppose it goes back to Councillor Stubbs' question. The moving target is an unhelpful one.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dowling. I now call on Councillor Smythe to ask a question to Councillor Ashmore, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just want to ask Councillor Ashmore whether the Cabinet is satisfied with the recent changes to rubbish collection in the southern part of the city, and what plans are there to prevent uncollected rubbish bags from piling up, as has happened recently.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Smythe. I can say the Cabinet is happy with the recent changes to rubbish collections, as they are keeping, in our aims with keeping weekly collections and increasing recycling and keeping the streets cleaner with the wheeled bins there, in not just the southern part but in all parts, but obviously in some areas where there's more forecourts, you'll have wheeled bins and in areas where there's flat fronts they haven't. There have been some, shall we say, teething problems with that. That's why I think that's what you're referring to with some being left there. Some of that's miscommunication with crews, for example, when the rules were stating the wheel bins could fit up to 3 standard-sized bin bags. There was a case where someone managed to cram 4 in there, so someone took it out and left that one. That's not what's going to happen. If you can get it in and shut the lid, it's in there. They're not going to count the bags. So there's some of that. Some of it might have just been due to residents being unaware of the policy change. So they will get a letter to say what's happened. Not everyone tunes in and watches us here every month, or follows the council on social media, or is on the awesome Facebook group Portsmouth Politics, shout out. So I'm just mentioning it in here that's what happened. And sorry, he's trying to put me off. But yeah, so that's what's happened. There's teething problems like that. No, the side waste, the excess waste, and all that, they will get cleared away. They won't just be left there for weeks and weeks. It won't become like something out of Mad Max there. No, don't fear about that. Obviously, and also just to say, if you do feel you need a bigger allowance on that one, you've got a bigger family, bigger household on that one, you can contact the council for an assessment on that. And if you're recycling properly and you generally need one, you'll get a bigger capacity.
Thank you, Councillor Swive.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm concerned because there are a lot of people that have approached me about piles of bin bags in my ward. Lennox Road South, Auckland Road East, they've now been cleared up, I think, because I asked this question. Thank you very much. But there were piles of rubbish in plastic bags in Chetwynd Road, and indeed opposite my house, well, not my rubbish, I hasten to add, near the junction of Victoria Road South and Marmion Road. I wondered if we could be assured that you'll be lenient, that the bin personnel are going to be lenient, because there's a lot of people complaining about rubbish collection for HMOs in particular, and people feeling that their environment is and health is being threatened by these piles of black plastic bags.
Totally empathise with that. Obviously with HMOs the rules are slightly different, but it goes on average with HMOs with the rooms they've got, and calculated as to what they need and on what type of HMO class they are. No, I totally empathise with that. If there is a lot of rubbish in forecourts just outside that, we've got new measures to get on with that one that's been introduced by Councillor Sanders there. But yeah, rest assured, any problem with bags of rubbish that's been left anywhere or just dumped or fly tipped, just get hold of me and I'll contact the waste team and we'll get there with them, because that's not acceptable at all.
Councillor Swive.
Thank you, Councillor Ashmore.
Thank you. Okay, in that case, calling Councillor Bosher, please.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Subtly different thing, Councillor Ashmore, and it's meant genuinely. Up in Drayton Farlington, obviously we have an awful lot of properties that now have 3 wheelie bins, brown one, green one, and now the black one. A small request, if I can please, because even though we do welcome them up there, when the bins are being emptied, residents due to put them at their boundary, but when they are being returned, they are just literally being shoved onto the pavement. And with a large elderly population, it is like an unbearable assault course with each property with 3 bins just scattered on the pavements. Perhaps through you could actually ask for a little bit of consideration, particularly for some of the elderly and some of the disabled that we have up there, to make sure that bins are actually returned to the property boundary and not just left in the middle of pavements.
Thank you, Councillor Bosher. Absolutely empathise with that. Obviously, this is something not just related to wheel bins. There's obviously other bins as well, 3 bins on that one. Yeah, I'll be happy to put a word in for that one. If you do suffer with, say, like disabilities or mobility problems, we do offer assisted collections, so that might be worth mentioning as well to some people.
Sorry, I'm talking more about disabled people actually
Walking into them as well. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, but that as well. Yeah, they should be putting it back. But that's a word I'll have. Thank you, Councillor Bosher.
Councillor Udy, please.
Has there been any early indication that recycling rates have been improved since the changes to rubbish collection?
Thank you, Councillor Udy. It's a difficult one because obviously it's not fully rolled out till next week, so we haven't got exact figures, but yes, there are indications following on from the trials that were had that recycling does go up and tonnage of waste goes down and people do things like reuse rubbish rather than just waste them, but yes.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I would note that when the operatives have been told to stop taking the bags out of the bins and put them in the roads, they actually put the bags in the rubbish bins, so they have actually done it, so I would hope they'd be able to do the same for what Councillor Bosher has been putting forward. Can I ask the Cabinet Member to agree with me that any councillors or anyone who's got any particular issues around uncollected bags in the forecourts or outside the forecourts of HMOs should immediately report them to the private sector housing team, and if they don't offer up any assistance, more than happy to report them to both you and me.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. Yes, I agree.
Councillor Hugh Mason.
Would the Cabinet Member agree with me that one of the causes of the recent spate of black bags piling up in the southern part of the city has been the reluctance of some of the landlords of HMOs to invest in the larger size wheelie bins which the council makes available at a reasonable price?
Thank you, Councillor Mason. It's something worth looking into, yes. So that's what I'll say at this rate, because I've no idea of the specifics on which particular houses, but yes, that's something worth looking into, Councillor.
Councillor Ferret, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I've almost got an engineer question here, because what I really wanted to say was clearly this has been a very difficult sort of project to introduce, and I have to thank Dave for his work on this and his responsiveness. That I got in touch with him during the course of a residents' meeting whilst having a conversation with residents about bin bags not being collected, and by the time it came for me to answer them again, David responded and said that he would get it sorted out. So I've really got to thank him for his efforts on this. And I suppose it's just to say those sort of issues we're having in Paulsgrove, I assume that those have now been addressed and rectified.
Thank you, Councillor Ferret. Yeah, I think that particular issue involved, it hadn't been collected, but that was due to a breakdown, so in a vehicle breakdown, which would have happened regardless of that one. But yeah, any issues like that, anything like that, there's still going to be ongoing. There's still going to be things we can learn from that. But yeah, any councillor who has residents come up to and ask them stuff, yeah, feel free to get hold of me. And I'll try and get back as quick. I can't promise I'll get back that quick to everyone, but but yeah, I'll try and get back as quick as possible.
Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can the Cabinet Member confirm the level of uptake from those properties that are flat-fronted?
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Coles. No, I can't confirm with exact numbers, but I can confirm there has been a lot of interest according to what reports were telling me about them. Yeah, including one other friend, councillor, who I'm staring at right now. Right.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Ashmore. We now move on to question number 6 from Councillor Hooper to Councillor Sagg, please.
Okay, my question is, when were Hatherley Road and Dryden Avenue last resurfaced as part of the PFI programme?
They haven't been resurfaced as part of the PFI programme, not since it started.
Councillor Hooper?
Yes, okay. According to the information I've been given, I've been looking into it, according to the PFI contract of 2005, all of Portsmouth Road should have been resurfaced by 2013 within that 8-year period. Now, I'm a little perplexed, as are my residents, because we're all feeling the bumpety bump on our backsides and looking at the hideous, scruffy aesthetic. Why we have been left behind the rest of the city, because a lot of our side roads are incredibly scruffy. Why were they not resurfaced?
The first 5 years of the PFI contract were the main roads, and that was the major, it was front-loaded, the whole system. But part of the contract is the tertiary road system. And the tertiary roads, which are obviously the residence roads, they get, there's a programme which lasts three years. Every 3 years there is a programme where they review all the roads. And Hatherley Road and
what was the other one? Have been reviewed, they've been looked at, and structurally both the roads are sound. However, they admit that the surface is aesthetically not very pleasing. They're finishing the current round of current three-year programme. They'll be starting planning the next one for next year. It goes from 2019 to 2022, and they will have a look at the road, and they will certainly take into account the nature of the surface of the road, and they will consider putting in a surface covering, a thin surface covering, which they do. That's not taking the whole surface off, but covering it over, which they've done on many roads before.
I would just say that these two roads, Dryden and Hatherley, are symptomatic of many of our side roads, residential roads in Paulsgrove. I've travelled around the whole city, I've been looking at road surfacing, and we have been left behind the rest of the city, which I think is incredibly unfair, and a lot of my residents do as well, and I know my ward colleagues also share those concerns. So we're just needing to be caught up in Paulsgrove, I think.
There are a lot of roads in the city, like the ones, some of them in Paulsgrove, but the contract goes for redoing, if the structure of the road is not in good condition, then it will be repaired. The surface, unless it is badly broken up, and if it's over 30% of the road surface is broken up, it will be repaired. But otherwise, it will be part of the next programme to be looked at. However, there's a limited fund. There's £200,000 a year put aside for the tertiary road maintenance, and it hasn't actually been used for about 5 years. I think there's £1 million in the budget in the pot at the moment. So those are being they're using that money to look at the rest of the roads. But whether it will depend on how bad the road is compared to other roads, they'll be prioritised.
Moving on to question 7 from Councillor Bowsher to Councillor Stagg.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Question number 7, standing in my name.
I'll read this to you because it will be better worded than I would say. Boundaries, first of all, we'll get a request for residence parking zones from an area. And once we know what the area is, the boundaries are then determined by identifying the main roads enclosing an area where people have asked for a parking zone. These form the most suitable boundary lines. Main roads are often already restricted by double yellow lines, bus stops, limited waiting, etc., due to their status as key traffic routes, and are therefore used to designate parking zone boundaries. And there are some examples. Queen Street, for example, separates the Porty parking zones JA and JB. Fratton Road separates the Fratton parking areas GA, JE and JF. Stamshaw Road separates the Stamshaw parking zones FD and FE. Havant Road, Carsham separating the Carsham parking zones B, C and BF. And Victoria Road North separating the Alby Summerstown parking zone with the newly approved MB and MC parking zones.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. It sounds very complicated. Will the Cabinet member tell me then, on that basis, why was the MF zone, which had initially been subject to this process, summarily chopped in half between the 12th of July and 8 days later when it was published to go for a meeting on the 31st of July?
Well, for a start, it was only a draft map, a draft proposal, and I was the one who said I thought it was far too wide, stretching from east to west. So if you happen to live in the western side and the only place you could park your car is the eastern side of the zone, you had a hell of a long way to walk. So I suggested dividing it in the middle. In addition to that, two of the ward councillors, Councillor Stubbs and Councillor Whittington, had both said that the residents had said they don't need residence parking zones because there's a different type of housing on that eastern side with quite a lot of off-road parking.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I think there's a few inaccuracies in that. So what is the Cabinet member therefore telling me that a predetermined, defined, coloured map that was put into a decision-making report, which would have been taken as a decision, was summarily changed at her request, despite the fact that she's actually said at the outset that requests from residents determine parking zones, and so this was actually taken out by her and her alone.
No, I didn't say by me and me alone. I said I suggested it, but it was in consultation with the officers who all agreed.
Councillor Fielding.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Will the Cabinet member commit to stronger enforcement in parking zones affected by match day traffic around Fratton Park?
I think that's a difficult one to do. I know in the past what they have done is suspended parking around the Fratton Park area on Saturdays, but it's very difficult to have parking zones that are limited just to Saturdays with parking. I used to live just around the corner from there, and all you did was if you went out on a Saturday when it's match day, you didn't come back until after 5 o'clock. It was very simple. If you buy a house there, that's the problem. But it is very difficult to have a residence parking zone for just one day, perhaps every fortnight, perhaps occasionally in midweek, but for half the year.
Councillor Stubbs.
At the decision meeting where the decision was taken to implement MB and MC, the Cabinet member alluded to the number of responses and said that there were crudely 220 one way and 240 the other. It was around those numbers. And the Cabinet member more or less implied that she went for the larger number. That being the case, if I present her with a list of 20 names, will she reverse her decision? I'll stop there.
I don't quite understand that. The whole idea of the consultation is that it's a vote, and if there's a majority in favour, then it goes in. If there's a majority against it, it doesn't go in. It's simple and straightforward. It's based on numbers.
Thank you very much, Councillor Saunders.
I have to say, I remember the last time the MB and MC zone was consulted, it was about 20, and you did absolutely nothing. So I think we're used to that. Will the cabinet member will recall that she and I were lobbying for the reintroduction of the Station Road, Manor Park Avenue, Collis Road parking zone, which we did in the last time in March 2018. When we asked the council to do that, we were told that the area was too small and that we should be consulting on bigger areas such as Baffins or Copner or Fratton. Will she confirm that at no stage was there actually a process to decide what Baffins or Copner or Fratton was? They were just names, not specific areas.
It was a very different system 10 years ago, and a lot of the residence parking zones are much smaller. And in fact, in our ward, as you know, we have one road which has only got 13 houses in it, and that's got a residence parking zone. The reason for that is because it has a used car showroom in the front of it, it's got a pub to the side of it, a doctor's surgery across the road, and next door but one, there's a church which has a lot of activities. So that was the reason. So it's changed quite a lot since then.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Peter Harris.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Following the call-in at Scrutiny Management Panel last week, can the Cabinet member please confirm to me if there will be a new informal survey for the entire parking zone of MB and MC following the additional 3 roads in each?
No, there is no legal requirement for an informal survey at all. The only legality is the traffic regulation order, which went out and it was people returned the forms. That's the only legal requirement.
Councillor Lyon.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. 2 points. One, the first is that if you go to Brent, you'll find that they have a big parking zone for Wembley event days, so I don't see any reason why we couldn't enforce something like that. In Portsmouth, it's just simply a question of logistics. And second, you talk about sizes of parking zones. There's one currently being put in Twyford Avenue for 18 houses, which to me sounds like a very small zone in itself and rather contradicts your own statement a little while ago.
The thing is that Twyford Avenue, along with a few other places, were actually scheduled to be put in way back before 2012 when the whole system was suspended. So that's why that then came to the top of the list. That was the next one on the list to be done. So that's why it was done. And the reason for it, it's a small one because it suffers from parking from Mountbatten Centre, according to residents anyway.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor Harris, you were trying to signal.
Yeah, I'm aware, Lord Mayor, we've got probably about a minute left before questions runs out, so I am proposing there's only 5 questions left. If we could suspend standing orders, so those questions can be heard today.
Is that seconded?
Well, I wanted them. I put them on the order paper.
No, it's 1 minute. Councillor Peter Harris for Councillor Smith, please.
Oh, question my name.
Okay, thank you. I didn't think we would sort of get here. We're going to run over now. The events will be collaborated between the events team, museum service, libraries and archives. The activity will raise awareness of the Charter and its fundamental place in the history of the city, engaging residents of all ages and providing some stimulus for the visiting economy. The museum service are leading on plans to borrow the copy of the first charter that's in the Bedlewin Library, or one of the 3 copies in the City of London Records Office, or one in the British Library. The City Museum will be the best location for display, with a secure and climate-controlled environment. The staff are experienced in negotiating such loans with all the technical, legal and insurances requirements. Associated with this, we are also exploring the earliest deeds of Portsmouth property.
Can carry on. Finish.
I can carry on. Okay. Earliest deeds of Portsmouth property and records of Portsmouth people. The events will also provide an opportunity for later royal charters held in the Lord Mayor's corridor to be displayed in the Central Library. The charter enabled the city to provide a free mart fair, and this will take place in summer 2019 with the events team leading. The traditional symbol of the fair is the gloved hand, and craft groups will be engaged in creating new and innovative versions to hang at the fair and be displayed in community venues around the city. Other workshops for adults and children will be on the theme of calligraphy and charter making and will be delivered by either the library or the museum services. The Portsmouth paper on the charter, written by Sarah Quayle, which I have a copy of, if Councillor Peter Harris would like a copy, is currently out of print, and this will be republished for the event with an opportunity for Sarah, a previous head of museum service, to relaunch the paper. Further talks are planned by archivists John Stedman and Michael Gunton to explore charters and other medieval documents and provide analysis of the painting The Three Mart Fair by Richard Udstall. A further lecture is planned on the archaeology of early Portsmouth, which will be collaboration between the museum and the archive teams. Finally, a photographic competition will take place to coincide with the fair and record a day in the city. Copies of the entries will form part of the city archive. You're also aware that D-Day 75 anniversary is next June, so it will try and be either side of that. Thank you.
So concludes today's council meeting. Thank you everyone, and there are refreshments in the Lord Mayor's parlour for those that wish to come back. Thank you much.
Can I thank people for bringing in some food for the food bank? Thank you very much.